Welcome back to Season 5 of the True Blue Conversations podcast with your host, Adam Bloom. Welcome back to Season 5 of the True Blue Conversations podcast with your host, Adam Bloom. Podcasters, Adam's book, Easy Target, Taming the Black Dog, is now available for pre-order. Head on over to Booktopia, Dimmix and Big Sky Publishing to pre-order your copy and be one of the first to read Adam's story of surviving to thriving and how he escaped the cycle of being an easy target. Easy Target, Taming the Black Dog by Adam Bloom. Coming soon.
Welcome back to part 2 of our podcast with Dan Fortune, DSC and Bar. And it's an absolute honour to have him back on for part 2. Dan, welcome back, mate.
Good morning, Adam, and thank you, and good morning and hello to all the listeners.
Mate, part 1 was absolutely a ripper, and I can't wait.
I hope so. Did they listen to that? I watched that Duke and Irish sitcom on podcast again last night. Do they watch these? Do they listen? Do they?
Yes, yeah. But it's good to have you back, mate. And we'll pick up. So you've just come back from your Bosnia trip, and we had the Black Hawk incident.
So I'll move quickly, mate, because I think just to pivot into this next sort of phase, so we don't drag too much of the chain, because really the next episode of my career was characterised by a pretty serious injury. So I returned with the family post-Bosnia, came back. I was posted to SO3 Ops 1 Brigade. So this is, the chance to potentially be more competitive for Staff College by broadening my career and, getting an ops job in a brigade headquarters. So good career move, and it was a bit of a WTF, really. I had no idea what that was going to look like. But the family were committed to going to Darwin, so it was another adventure, and we were there. There we were.
So was that the injury? Was that your finger?
No.
What happened?
It was a real tragic accident in the surf at Swanbourne. I really don't want to talk about it because it's quite traumatic.
Yeah,
I was spinally injured, and I was, and there's still a deficit and legacy from that impact. And people who know me will see that. So I broke my neck, C4-5 fracture.
Yeah, right.
I went straight into. So I was home on leave, home being in Perth. Ended up at Swanbourne Beach in the morning. Got dumped. Boogie board, don't boogie board. Hadn't been in the ocean for a year. All the things you don't do. Mm-hmm. Sadly, Shetton Park Rehab spinal ward is littered with surf accidents from Swanbourne. The beaches, domestic beaches. It's very more common than I realised, and people diving in and banging their head and becoming quadriplegics. Yep. It's really sad. I was extremely, extremely lucky. Whilst I have a deficit and it'll ever be a life-changing accident, I was able to recover. I'm not getting the medical aspects, but I was paralysed for about 48, 72 hours ago. Couldn't move my left hand. I had central cord syndrome. So I was very lucky. When I was casevaced out and moved, I was ambulanced off the surf, Lorraine pulled me out. And I think it was classic. It was Marsh, son of Mitch Marsh's dad. Jeff Marsh was on the beach and he carried the litter. And I'm in the collar. So we got carted up, Shenton Park, very rehabilitative approach. In other hospitals I might have been gone in a few straight away, interventionist. The injury recovered. I was then remained posted in Perth. The regiment was fantastic. People looked after me. I was posted administratively to SASR. I was able to recover, and to some extent there was it was a bit of a facade of recovery, if I'm honest. I was desperate to get back and be FE again because it was a potential career changer. And I did the work required and was still competent, but I was impacted and was never going to be the same physically. But in the pivoting into my career-wise, that sort of was at least that time where it was manageable, in my words, So that's what happened, mate. And then there was a rapid transition of events, and come back to Mike Hindmarsh. The outcome was I was identified to be OC2 Squadron, and at a 3-year tenure, 98, 99, this is through 97, in recovery, in Perth. Family relocated, a lot going on in that race, and my health and wellness was still fragile. But I got to the point where I was promoted to OC2, and then with the focus on Op Gold in 2000.
You also deployed to Bougainville, didn't you?
Yeah, so almost as I've pinned on temporary brand new junior woodchuck Major Fortune. At the time, there was a contingency to support the truce monitoring group in Bougainville. A range of happenstance, Michael Hindmarsh sent me over to be a liaison officer into the headquarters at AST in Sydney at Garden Island. I found myself embarked on an RAN vessel, and we put a special recovery contingency option embarked on the ship to support the landing. Okay. And I was the OC. Yeah, right. So it was my first big grown-up job. It was a whole bunch of, now we would be under the special recovery bailiwick, and it's what we did, and it was a real thing. To what extent it was fully declared, I'm not sure. We were under very strict very clear restrictions about not going onto the territory, and there was a whole bunch of other operational realities that I got exposed to into the joint and Australian theatre world. My director was signed by Lieutenant General Jim Connolly, and through Special Operations Headquarters was very much a component operating in there. My J3 was Jeff Singelman. And I'll never forget this as advice to young officers, and I used it again. As I was embarking, I was in Navy rig, Lieutenant Commander Fortune, in Probans, and I was about to walk onto the vessel, and Jeff looked at me and he gave me the advice I'll never forget. He said, looked at me, said, any final advice? And he said, looked at me and said, Dan, don't fuck up. And turned around and walked straight away. And it was a real welcome to the NFL moment. And I've often used it to others. And, while it's a bit, belligerent and in your face, there's a certain Jeffness about that makes you start to grow up a bit. So we went to Bougainville, came back, and then not long after in 98, with the Force Gen cycle in the regiment, then 2 Squadron was sort of the Year 1 Squadron, took the reinforcements in and worked towards a contingency war roles in Year 2, with Year 3 being the CTSRO. That was a simplistic way of the Force Gen cycle. Yep. So in 98 at the same time, there was a lot going on in the strategic space, and the regiment put together a regimental-sized task group to support the air war and the coalition, what was then around Iraq and Saddam Hussein's posturing. Yep. So I think maybe much earlier in 98, Mike Hindmarsh as the CO took a regimental SOC C, folded into a coalition combat search and rescue contingency if the air war ever escalated and there was a lot of forces deployed of Pollard. And it was a seminal deployment in the regiment's force capability development because the vehicles were sent and they were able to get matched up with ring mounts. Before there was pintle mounts and 7.6 was, it was back in the day, rogue hero stuff. Yep. Wasn't operationally viable. So ring mounts, 50s, 40s, and if people remember long enough, that's when the M4 fleet was gifted by the minister. He visited the troops, and it was a classic SF sort of coup, SAS coup. The sand, the styles weren't popular, they couldn't be modularised at the time. But that's what happened. We got the M4 fleet. The minister said get them M4s, and the force packaging became very seminal later in Rhino Afghan early days. Yep. I got to then rotate in as a OC, downsized rotation after 3 months of that posture. It was clearly not going to happen, but a wonderful experience to be identified as the next guy to go. Small squadron SOC C, downsized. Kiwis embedded with us, and we had a 6-week deployment. We went into Kuwait, stepped into the operational role, did the rehearsals, the mission profiles. Wonderful experience. But then all the US said, well, the assets out, so we came home. So by the end of 98, as an OC, I had 2 operational deployments. In that context, in command, it was a wonderful learning experience. I was still very much, it was always, trying to fumble my way through it. But it was a bit of I was very gifted in that, blessed, in that start. So that's what I remember.
And then you mentioned op goal. What was op goal?
Well, yeah. Okay, so 99 we go war rolls, whole bunch of training. Timor happens. Yep. The rest of that, rest 4, squadron and regiments do great work. 2 Squadron, we're ring fenced. We're the koalas. We're the guys. The joke was, who's in Timor? Not 2 Squadron. So op goal was all about the domestic capability to support the Olympics. Yep. It was a significant culminating point in the Special Forces' contribution to national domestic security. Obviously, it was civilian-led, and a whole bunch of work had been framed up through the Commonwealth agencies and the state coordination mechanisms that made the state police far more capable. And the Olympics was a big game in town, mate. And we got to be that squadron that was the tag. It was a wonderful experience. Raised it was then the Joint Incident Response Unit, so the CVRN capability, later the IRR, now the SOIA. Early days, running decon lanes, and the ship underway, the mission profiles. We deployed to Sydney at the back of Luscombe into the Camp John West. It was the condemned barracks, I think, from Ingleburn. They relocated, built this sort of ghetto at the back of Luscombe, and we folded into it late. I remember it was March on the CT concentration. We got flogged. Well, sorry, we flogged ourselves, and I certainly drove a hard tempo. I know that was partly my own problem. But when we went deployed to Sydney, we did significant concentration with the aviators because we were rebuilding the aviation capability. Yep. And we had a wonderful exposure through the target venues and building mission profiles and target development. So, see, it was won over the Olympics. It was a massive experience, and then the games themselves. Well, what a blur of. There's only so many gold medal events you can fit into one of the Olympics, mate.
Did you enjoy, especially the Olympics, being your home Olympics? Was it great to obviously be, you were OC, and were you working alongside the New South Wales Police a lot as well, or were you guys?
No, they're absolutely integrated. They're very much the lead. It's based on relationships. We'd done a lot of work up in the deliberate national coordinated level planning and preparation. So it was a very deliberate set of high-level decision frameworks and mission profiles with the ministers and government involved. They'd changed legislation to enable a more proactive and robust posture. There was a whole bunch of legal. It was grown up, and much of the legislation in place is still in place, but it's now being revisited as the domestic space changes. So a lot going on there, mate, and in the book, and it deserves its own sort of journey. We had the aircraft. We often went to and from, for phases we went to Manly and occupied at North Head and did mission profiles under the ship underway. So squadron, 6 or 8 Black Hawks, Hilo Assault Force, vectoring a 4 or 6 Zodiac boat assault force, not Zodiac, big ribs, sea-based ribs, smashing up to get a fully profiled big ferry, and we're making this happen. And I'm the C2 bird trying to visualise it. So those lessons and learnings I was able to take forward, but it was very much a window into the joint world and personally, leadership-wise, a lot of challenges too. We were away at home for a lot of time, 7 or 8. I think 7 out of 10 months were away in peacetime conditions of service. And that was what it was, but that comes at a cost. To the extent we had a phase during the op gold, we brought the families over. And it was a recognition that there was something had to be done, and we didn't really understand it. But that's sort of a sense of tempo. I've been on a lot of operations. Op gold was extremely demanding, very dangerous training. Lots of we integrated with US, UK, and huge fond memories of the team and the people you work with, and that's the takeaway. Always is.
Oh, and that's, as we know, and you know it all too well, Dan, is that training. There are, how many brothers have you lost because of training accidents?
Well,
that's the tempo. That's what it is.
Yeah, it's sad, but it's the way it is. And sometimes you take those risks in training so you don't have catastrophic losses in operations. I lived with a guy called Steve Daly. Steve was my forward scout, and I was a young K trooper with him. Steve was killed in an aircraft accident at PDS. So I know what it's like to lose a mate in a military aircraft. The Black Hawk we talked about. Mm-hmm. In the work up for Op Gold, with the aircraft of 5AV, we had a serious roping incident. I was the next off the rope. A US SEAL, the aircrew got it wrong. They lifted off while he was still on the fast rope. He released off the rope about 6-8 metres above the ground, impacted hard, at high range, and we had to rework through the whole confidence and risk management of that again. So it's tough to do that in training.
Absolutely.
But people now, I've got a nephew who's working in the regiment. He faces those risks now. It's sort of part of the parcel, but it's not to be understated, and that's what you sign up for. But when it actually happens, it gets really impactful.
Absolutely. And I want to go forward, Dan, to
jump because I then go to
2001.
Timor.
No, 2001, 9/11, that day that changed the world.
Yeah.
Where were you on that day? And did you think, Dan, that your life for the next decade would go the way it did? And what do you remember of that day?
Yeah, no comprehension of what it would mean. I was on long service leave in Alice Springs, embarking on a very important family trip, because at the end of Op Gold, I then went to Timor as the OC of the MREC 4, an element of 2 squadron. Finally got to Timor, went with the 1st Battalion Group and did 4 months. Came home. I was not, at that stage, I'd been selected for Staff College, despite, to the astonishment of many and myself, I'd got to Guernsey for Staff College. I'd asked to be deferred a year, took some long service leave. So the 2001 time, I was actually right off the grid and not really understanding anything what would happen. I then returned to Canberra en route, and it started to get real as I was at Staff College and then immediately posted in Defence Headquarters out of Staff College working for the Vice Chief. And that was when Falconer occurred. The Chief of Defence Force was General Cosgrove, and I got a sense of it working inside the 5th floor Russell, what that really meant in terms of how the grown-ups played in a war. But obviously between that time there'd been Afghan and the guys got gone in, and I thought I was the SAS officer who was never going to go to Afghanistan, to be honest. Through sort of 02, 03, I was off the grid and I was not that guy. So that's my memories now, looking back. No sense of what it was going to mean, but at the same time, a lot going on in my career around that space.
Absolutely. And I want to talk about that because you went to RMC, and what was that like, mate, as now being RMC and...
The time I was appointed CIO?
Correct.
Okay. So just the chronology. So, got it. I've come out of Staff College, worked for the Vice Chief. A wonderful trip that's worth just a quick reflection.
Sure.
I'll go with the end of Falconer. People might remember the SAS into Iraq.
Yep.
So not the Afghan, remember Pivot, George Bush, Iraq.
Yes.
SAS, Western Desert.
Yes.
Al-Assad Airfield. I'm working in Russell, working for wonderful officer, the Vice Chief, Russ Shoulders. I'm his staff officer. There was no 06 between me. I was the 04 Major working with the 3-star. It was a real window into how things played out.
Yep.
Anyway, because he's a CDF, he was going with the Minister for this post-Falconer sort of regional support to thank the post nations for posting the forces, because there'd been a lot of operational security in the lead up, and that's what happened. I got the Guernsey to go as Cossie's bag boy and his aide. So I got in a challenger with the Minister, the Secretary of the Department, who was Robert Hill, one of the Minister's staff, and me. So it was a fascinating trip. We went to all the countries through the Middle East, and including when we went into Iraq, we landed at Baghdad, and the CDF said, and the Minister, so the C-130 went forward and we landed at Al-Assad Airfield while the regiment was still on the ground there. At the end of the combat phase, just doing the wrap-up, I'm running around with the camera. So that's my experience in Iraq, mate, with the camera, running around as the puffy staff officer with the CDF. So that was my Iraq experience. But Duntroon, I then got a Guernsey as the SO J3, had been the SO1 Ops through our reintroduction to Afghanistan. I'd hoped to get a Guernsey in Afghan, it wasn't going to happen. Was told by Dockham there's no chance that I was going to pick up an operational tour. And I was blessed to be, and I was very lucky, I was selected to be CO Duntroon. It was a career highlight, and it brought me home to Canberra too, because I'd been commuting married separated while I was at Special Operations Headquarters in Building 130, it was still down there. So that sort of gives the backstory to Duntroon, and I was so lucky to be CO Duntroon. It was a career highlight.
Well, you were also...
I think I was surprised, I think I was maybe one of the ex-service to go there, I don't know, but... There was still training command, and General Dick Wilson was the training commander. Peter Lay was the chief. There was something that they saw they wanted into the college that I was going to obviously try and provide.
And you were, in 2004, you were promoted to Lieutenant Colonel.
Correct.
And you were you served as the Principal Operations and Planning Officer in Special Operations Headquarters.
Yeah, the J3.
Yeah, what was that like, and what was your role in that?
Well, just so that occurred after the Vice Chief staff job.
Right.
Because in the officer, the Rupert career path, subunit command, get selected for staff college. Depending on how you compete at staff college, and you then do a post-staff college job, which I got the 1 star. I got the 1 year job working with the Vice Chief, then I was promoted. Then J3, a lot going on. The regiment just got out of Iraq. And as it turned out, we'd done a futures conference in 2005. We were building capabilities to transition towards the DCT focus. There was Acolyte, the Commonwealth Games were on, so there was a lot of domestic planning and building capabilities and transitioning the TAG from TAG West to TAG East in some lift and shift to some of the maritime offshore stuff. Mm-hmm. And that had its own intentions inside the command, as that was balanced out between who was going to give off and who was going to take on. Mm-hmm. And that was a healthy debate, but obviously around frictions and tensions. And then Afghan landed on us.
Yep.
2005 under Siege of Sodaf. So it was an intense, busy period.
Mm.
But that preceded then my selection for CO as Duntroon. So just in sequence, that occurred before my time as CO Duntroon.
And you did deploy, though, for the first time to Afghanistan.
Yeah, 2005, I went with the boss, and we it was SOTG1 was in, Jim McMahon as CO. They were in TK, in the Fob Davis, right in the back of bloody, this is early days in the TK, mate. It was early days, and I landed there, and we went in. The Bagram headquarters was at Bagram under Siege of Sodaf C2, so the SOC C and the CO was at Bagram, which is not a TK.
Yeah, right.
It's not, and there they were. So we went in, and it was a squadron heavy group with a small commando element, and we pivoted that under ISAF, and the force structure balanced and rebalanced again. So that's an important in the whole story of what happened. The way the force posture evolved gets lost to the uninitiated. So I visited them. I think I was on the ground about a week, not long. But we went right around Kandahar. Again, met the minister in Kabul. H was Sokost. Mm-hmm. So as the J3, I got to go visit Robert Hill again. Mm-hmm. He said, I remember you, and I'm the same guy. It was fascinating. And then Karzai it was early days Afghan, mate, very early. I was driving around Kabul in an unprotected white clear vehicle in uniform, and it was just happy days. And I went back in 2014, I had a PSD, up armoured, and we were low signature because I thought I was going to get killed every time I drove out the gate.
Yeah, right.
So that, and the 05 was just cruising around Kabul. That's what happened. So, it's hard for me to put it in context because I'm too close to it. But 05 was Afghan.
Yep.
And to TK, Fob Davis.
Yeah, right.
They go, what's Fob Davis? That's what it used to be. It's wooden huts that the Americans left us.
So, I'm guessing back then it was just like early days, starting to establish what would then become the home and for the next decade. It's a bit, I get my tours of Afghan mixed up and they get jumbled. And the 05 visit, while it's very important, I could just have to take time to just sort of picture it a bit. Yep.
So as the J3, we were running the component operations. So I was very much in the day-to-day fight in the staff world because we were receiving the messaging from the headquarters and telling and briefing up through the chain of command, including the SCGs through COMAST. And as the J3, I was the guy on my feet.
Yeah, right.
And so it was fascinating. And then they were doing this bizarre partnering with, the MK. I met MK, sat in a Shura with MK, Matty Olakam, who was killed later. Uncle of the later Gold Dodgy brothers, and I can't think of his name now because the famous Peacock who was killed later, his dodgy uncle, we met and had a Shura. He had the one eye. That's what I remember of 05. Mm-hmm. It was Wild West, mate. I had to go and brief the COMAST, and we were partnering with the highway patrol, and it was obviously this proxy force working through this loose arrangement that was really challenging. We know how that turned out.
Yeah, right.
But they were called the Highway Patrol. Yeah, right. And I had to go and brief it. And it was this, like, we call it the circus.
Yep.
So about 10 blokes would go out with 50 of these, and it was a massive force because gave you the force, wrist to force posture. Because out there then, you drive outside the gate, it was Wild West, game on. Unlike Donkey Kong, because it was terrain based, red flags everywhere, and just drove out and they came and looking and it was game on. That was the early days Wild West, clear, hold and build. It was just, so the proxy force was to manage the small force posture we had. And briefing up the highway patrol was hilarious. It was a very pucker staff officer. And I made the mistake of trying to be a smart ass, which I've done often to my peril. You know the Chips movie?
Yes.
Oh, you know those guys, Chips movie? And he didn't. I thought it was funny. He didn't. Very pucker naval officer. He thought we were being a bit belligerent and a bit cavalier. He was probably right.
So you come back from your 05 trip, quick trip, and then
Staff World, CO Duntroon.
Yeah, CO Duntroon, which was an amazing...
Yeah, and you know, wonderful journey. And right now, the thing that's so wonderful is the cadets still talk to me. And many of them are running the army now. A number of the single-digit COs. And many of the great COs of all genders across the army. Right now, it's just a happenstance. It's wonderful. And, yeah, institution... So it was wonderful to go back. It was a huge privilege.
Yep.
I worked again for Chris Appleton as my commandant. I was so lucky. It was what good looks like. And then I had the pivot, but similar, great mission commander, wonderful officer, Mark Bornholt. But the absolute counter of Chris. Mark was CO1 Bogger. Mm-hmm. Yobbo was his nickname.
Yeah, right.
And he came in and straight... Great boss and a really good officer, but different to Chris. And it was a bit of a mind shift for some of the staff when he came in. So I was very lucky. And training command evolved into what it became. And I learned a lot about inside army and the sensitivities of managing, and it helped me, I guess, to dispel some other perspectives of me as my capacity to manage outside of SO. And some real challenging leadership issues, ab initio, some real problems with the staff, some quite significant unacceptable behaviour, court-martial. So I just learned a lot, you know.
Yeah, right.
And obviously the joy was the full-time cadets and the relationships. The part-time staff, the SSOs, was fascinating. It's a great institution. I was very lucky to have fantastic staff. You have the best captains in the army.
Yeah, right.
They all come there. You know, the majors, to be honest, are a bit patchy, as it's always. But the captains are the rock stars and rock star S's, and they drive the place. The full-time cadets take care of themselves, and there's a lot of theatre. I would regard myself as a benevolent dictator. Cadets may describe me as otherwise.
Well, you mentioned that Afghan is in full swing, and you're thinking, I'm the officer that'll never going to happen.
And then I get the phone call that changes the world, mate.
2008, you deploy again to Afghanistan, and I want to talk about this, but I just want to go back because at this point we're starting to lose guys in Afghanistan.
Yeah, Lockie was killed.
Yeah, and I know you served alongside him. That would have been very hard on you. And in 2008, you're going over. It's not like 2005 because we lost Andy Russell in 2002, and then it was 2007 was when we had a big break as we were out of Afghanistan.
We're extremely, I won't say lucky, there was superb martial competence. Some of those early firefights, I mean, it was millimetres. There's some of the big ticks early in 05. Oh my goodness. It's full-on ambushes in some ways, and that we were fighting our way out of.
Yeah, right.
So, but you're right. So maybe if I jump in
please,
the call I got, H was Sokost, my home. I'm CO Duntroon. It's 07. I just had a very uncomfortable career interview because I was post command looking for a job, and I was asked to deploy, and I got told very clearly I was going to be going into document a very important staff job, and I should be thankful for that, and pull your head in and go away. And I had to send an apology because I got a bit of a shittogram and got all petulant with the career advisor, who was a great guy, and he just they forgave me. So I went home, and I had daughters in high school, and I remember, I was like, oh, well, that's what the way it is. You know, Dan, just deal with it, get over yourself. And that's honestly the way I remember it, because I wrote the email, grovelling. I said to Mark Bourne, he said, don't worry about it. I said, don't worry, just crack on. Be happy you got a job at Dockham and get on with it.
Yep.
Classic Bogger. No sympathy. So later, I can't remember when, and then Luke had been killed. No, Matty was killed.
Yep. Then Luke,
September. Spanner was the CO. Dan, he'd come through Canberra. I knew Dan very well. He was the CO of the regiment and then CO of SOTG, what we'd call 4, under ISAF's construct, into Kandahar as it became the laydown with variations of, with a repostured commando company group, smaller troop, SAS, Alpha Bravo, what it became, but different than what it was. And that had it baked in some issues there, as we know. So H rings me. I get Jasmine, the MA, his EA, I'm at Duntroon. I'm writing up some statement of reasons after a charge, doing the staff, and I'm writing a sit rep for training command. And the Sound of Freedom, these cadets are out on the playground, and Yasmin calls, "Hey Dan," and I know her voice. She said, "Boss wants to talk to you." I'm like, WTF? Oh. And in my mind, I said to Lorraine, the only thing is going to change is if H rings me and offers me CO, and that's like a pipe dream. Because I'm going to Dockham, that's the only, and she goes, what's going to happen? I'm foreshadowing the only way I'm ever going to deploy again, in my mind. This is over. So stability home. H comes on the phone, hey, laconic voice, Dan, I'm thinking I would like you to be the CO of the SOTG after Gav, who was in there. At this stage, Gav had deployed. I think it was right on the cusp. What do you reckon? I get emotional thinking about it. So that's what happened, mate. And then I went to Lockie's funeral because I was the designate. That was very emotional in the regiment. Matt had been... I lived right adjacent to Matt and his bride and his son, Keegan, when I'd been badly injured and just in recovery. And Matt was a Rio in 2 Squadron. I saw Trooper Locke and what a quality soldier he was from the very, very start. And so to have him killed was tragic, of course. And that was a very tough tour for those guys. And then the rest is history. Then I land in, I get to Guernsey, and oh my God, then it's grown-up world. And I'm downrange with SOTG CO 08.
Talk me through that and talk me through what... So... We're back in Afghanistan, and the role in 2008 of the SAS and the commandos. What were we doing at that point, Dan? Where was the war at?
Well, others will have many views of this, so I can just give you my truth. Right?
Please,
It'll be a bit patchy, and I might not get this right, and there'll give you gaps and fact checks in the detail because it does get jumbled up. But at the end of the day, I was very clear. My mission was to look after the protect the Australian footprint that was around TK, the RTF. Very clear. CJOPS then was the now GG, Governor General, and I'd been in the 1st Battalion when he was the CO. So David Hurley, and he was then CJOPS. And I remember he told me, and it was crystal clear in my mind, you're to mitigate the risk, and your focus is, save Australians, save the Aussies, protect them. There is a theatre role, of course, and you have to, I'll come back to pay your way and battle space management and all those things, but the crystal clear direction from CDOPS, And we went in, and I had H. I wasn't short of advice, remember. So General Mike Hindmarch said to become the National Commander. So I was very blessed in that regard. I can't say others had the same opportunities with their National Commanders. I'll leave it at that. So we were in there to do... I had, again, gifted OCs, Ben Pronk, and Nathan Junkowitz, mate. So, rock stars. So it was sort of tell them where you want to be, and there was a whole bunch of stuff going on, a brilliant RSM, and I'll come back to that controversial figure and my huge respect for him. So to answer your question, it was a national mission. We're under ISAF SOF. The Dutch owned the battle space. So we were working on 06. It was a weird C2. But I was in there to get into the fight, to lower the risk, and we were manhunting. It became very much into the network attack, find the networks, disable them. That was the smart. The SF posture in Afghan had been there a while. So from the Siege of Sodif lessons and the learnings, it wasn't the DA drive around terrain-based shoot 'em up, although in Aruzgun it was still a lot of that. But the threat it was economy of force in the south to some extent anyway. We were learning that. But we had to get in there and make our national mission come together. And then I was trying to balance there'd been tensions and always been tensions within the FEs, and there was early days of toxicity and fractious poor leadership, and I can't pretend there wasn't failures there on either side, right? And much of it carried over from Iraq. That's the fact. And the instigators around that know who they were, and there was much in the Sandy Beret side that later became very interested in the culture that were the problem at the start, you know. But hey, what would I know? I was only in the SAS for 13 years. So, you know, the way they treat the commandos early, and I was part of the problem too, to some extent, but it goes deeper. When you get into that sneering arrogance, no one forgets that, right? And that, so there was tensions in the group, but I had great leaders. And if you have good leaders and you're clear about what you're doing and don't cop any of the bullshit, it sorts itself out pretty quickly. And that sounds simple. It's not simple, and I'm not pretending I was any better than anyone else. But that's how we rolled, mate. And Alpha were into some SR and then some very unique. There's others wrote books about that tour, and then we had a Fist to History come out. And as best that he tells the story, you know, I've spoken to the author. I've read the draft chapter. It's quite weird when you read the official history's author's views of your tour and you're reading it with one of your subunit commanders. I've done that at the War Memorial. So best others read about that. I've got my highlights, but I'm obviously in there. It was extremely difficult for me towards the end. I got busted physically, mentally. I did 6 months no rockall, which is why we changed our force gen, and we started rotating the combat FE every 4 months when we were in a winter FE, but the Reggie Soc C trickled over a 6 month flow. And command appointments just sucked it up. I did 5 months, 45 days. Yeah, and that was okay, and I wouldn't have wanted it any other way. But that was the sort of mindset. And looking back, I was struggling towards the end, mate, because the tempo got kinetic. I had guys killed, serious injuries, and I there was on the ground and I was vicariously fighting the fight, and I was really hanging on tight towards the end, really tight.
Because you...
to the point, looking back, I wasn't managing myself well, because it was just, I was normalising shit that was just off the scale. So
at that point, were you still pushing the bubble out in...
Well, we were doing a range of things. We were trying to... I had Team Australia. I was wonderful. Dave Wainwright was the RTF commander. And they were doing a lot of work in expanding the Chura and expanding the influence around TK and building that community space and all the right things about Team Australia, you know. And H was very clear that we had to make sure that we were doing our shaping and enabling operations had some direct link to the network that was threatening them. And then there was obviously the battle space. I had a Canadian 2-star. I was in Kandahar with my SOC C, so it was an influence arrangement, and we had the Aussies. So we were building, and Ben was exceptional at this, Ben Pronk, building the targeting framework and the cycle, because we didn't have aviation on call. So you had to sort of strike to develop based on the LERM, bid for the assets, get them, and then have targets that you could legitimately get the CONOP approved for to go and then illuminate the network so to refine your targeting. So that's what we did, and that's my we complemented the Bravo. They spent a lot of time in the field, big physical presence, and because of that responsiveness, we're able to exploit opportunities through intelligence and close with and destroy or kill, networks, because they just got there, they were there, and they smashed them.
And
they found them, they hit them, and they won. But they had a big circus, so they had a presence. They weren't sneaking up on anyone. But if they were quickly able to posture, they'd catch these guys on the run, kill the PSD, and get after the HVTs.
And at that point too, as you mentioned, that the air, like getting the air assets, that came later, but the IED threat wasn't as prevalent was it?
No, it was right on the cusp of the pivot. Having said that, we were evolving into protected mobility and a lower signature and trying to false flag, and that'll be documented. So the ID threat was emerging. It was very much, and later was probably became the threat, and Sean tragically was killed. And that was one of the worst, most distressing mornings of my life. And he was killed by an ID. So we faced that threat, and the most vicarious, now I think back of the most elevated, traumatic and difficult evenings were towards the end of my trip, where Bravo, Marcus Fogarty and his team was doing an SRVs and a combination of unprotected mobility, and they were doing, we were extremely detailed route plan trying to avoid the ID threat, then get into a VDOP and then do long dismount at night, in, strike, out, on foot, big, and then sleep during the days if they could sleep and bang again. I smashed them. They were working hard. So we were very much conscious of the ID threat. We were trying to repackage ourselves. Dave, again, was brilliant in lending us PMVs. And we'd re-rig them and take the seats out and strip them out and give them back to him. But that's what we didn't have enough. And Alpha was still dealing with the idea of changing the way they model, because, with the LRPVs, they could outgun and you could sit back off and in the dash, and then... So the TTPs had to evolve, and how you close with the threat had to evolve. And we had to live that and find our way. Ben's team were hit by IEDs through the HOTO with 3 Squadron, because I there had 1 Squadron rotate to 3 with Dan Gamble, and then Junkers to Marcus Fogarty, Delta to Alpha. And there's one sort of mission profile that's worth noting in Ben's tours, the Freefall, the first combat Freefall. And if there's time, I'd like to talk about that. But
please.
Okay, so this is... I'm obviously a Freefall from way back, and this have heard that. But what I was able to be part of and command CO of, and I didn't get off the ramp at all, God no. So 1 Squadron come over, Wayne Jones and Danny Hogan, MG, these guys are hitters. They've worked up, they want to do a Freefall. And there's a legitimate offset of a half if you can get some eyes on a target and you can manage the squirters. There's a whole range of tactical reasons why you would want to get some eyes on. And Freefall in Afghan was a real legitimate way of getting in. They'd worked it up. I was cynical. We tried it once in 2005 and fumbled it when I was a staff officer. Inexperienced, poorly managed mission profile, and they cocked it up, and the Yanks went, no way, amateur out. Only National Mission Force does this stuff. The battle space owners are very, very twitchy, quite rightly, because they think it's hot dog, half-assed, tier 3 freefallers who are just going to get themselves in big shit, and they have to clean it up. Entirely legitimate view. Somewhat uninformed, but you can understand why conventional force US 2-stars going, no, that's National Mission Force and you're not them. Or I don't care, you show me why. So we worked that space, and I had, to some extent, built that trust with my senior commanders. I was confident of the capability. I had good support from but we then had to take it up through Canberra. And there was some naysayers, quite rightly, some cynics. And I think, to be fair, the very top, the CDF was Angus Houston. They're just, this is going to be pretty sporting. Landing in the dash at night under canopy. Guys, you really guys going to be able to pull this off? It's a legitimate WTF question. This is like SF, on roids. No. We know what we're doing here. This is that's what the SAS do. We do free fall into war. That's what we do. Otherwise, what have we been doing for 30 years? This is what I'm saying. Remember, this is a troop of fortune. Jumps out of the healer, and done the troop command, been a squadron commander, know that in a certain capability with all the right, air threat and depending on the profiles, this is a real thing. So they did the mission profile, and I said, well, show me. And they're like, who's this muppet? And I explained to them I needed to see it because I was a CO and I had to be convinced, and I was not convinced until I'd seen it. And they pulled it off. They were very, very capable. And I knew Wayne and Danny. And it was their way of building trust with the PCs. And Ben was sort of agnostic as the CO because he wasn't a freefall. It's like, whatever, But he could see the value of it. So they ran the mission profile. We had a US MC-130. So there's a lot of assets coordinated to make this work. And the US battle space, and the Canadians weren't. So we did it. And I remember briefing it, and they did it. And I before they went on this night jump, it was a night jump. They were Dog and Wayne. There were some very experienced jumpers there, but there was like troop commander, young Willem Leach, and I was so envious because this is the job you want in your logbook, right? Willem was the young captain. He wasn't a troop commander, but he was qualified and he was capable. Later CO. 60 jumps in his logbook. And I said to him, indulge me, team. I'm so envious of you. I know you're going to do a really good job. I'm backing you in. You can nail this tonight. But Willem, on half breaks, do the wind checks and don't invent anything tonight, right? Tonight's not the night you invent anything. Just stick to your drills, boys, and just pull it off, right? So we went and watched it on Pred, and I watched it and I saw him and I was like, and the rally drill was you had to get the head count, and there was 3 missing. Just off camera, couldn't see. It was about an hour later, I thought, better ring, go up there. I literally got up to get on the VoIP to ring H, go, yeah, not sure, but we can't see 3 of them. And it did on the pred come the 3 little. And it was like, happy days. And the rest is history. And they did more, and that was a seminal jump. So for the Fig Jam, for the record, it validated a capability that remains viable. Obviously, there's a whole range of factors you have to consider, particularly around the multi-domain threat now, and would you risk the asset. But if you can get a package together, and it validated some of the naysayers, as the vehicles did, and the maritime you need it. So those force projection days where there was questions of martial competence and super skills in insertion, yeah, that's what the S stands for, special. If you don't want those options, well then you don't have anything special, do you? So, yeah, that's me being a bit belligerent, but and it happened, and I was able to see it, and it's very rewarding, and it hardens your position because you know what you know, because you've seen it. And
for you mentioned, so Sean was killed in 08, and I had Harry.
I had Jason. I have to remember, Jason Marks was killed.
Jason Marks. I was just about to get to that.
April 27th, and then Sean 8th of July.
And
many wounded, tragically, seriously wounded, significantly life-changing wounds in and around those.
I had Harry Moffat on the podcast.
Legion H.
And that affected him.
Mate,
it still
time.
Affects him now. And for you being CO, how did that affect you? Because was this the first time you'd lost troops in command?
To the extent, well, certainly like that, yes. It was a very. I'm trying to remember because sadly I've had a bit more exposure to it. Look, the Sean's death was very, very difficult. We'd done a hell of a lot of planning. There'd been a big ID threat. I was down at the airfield farewelling Junker's call sign. His last hit, they were ripping out. And the night before, and this is in the IO, and I've put some stuff on LinkedIn so people can talk about this. It is traumatic. That when Sean was killed, they were doing a day move from a Aussie overnight fob where they'd co-located back to another fob. It was a day admin, not an admin move, but it wasn't an inside the green approaching a target in a tactical posture. And the AME in TK had gone red. I was aware of that. I'd rung Zan and told him we made a judgment around the risk. We reviewed the risk. I reviewed the risk to force and agreed that the AME out of CAF was suitable. Which was always the way it was. Typically, it was out of CAF, it was the standing. At TK wasn't always available. Anyway, tragically, in the morning, they struck the ID. And he was devastatingly injured, but there was some coordination getting the aircraft up, and obviously there was some time and space. And there was a lot of media. There was a Dutch doctor who, gutless, chinless wonder, wrote an email about this Sean bleeding out because of and the front page of the Australian, 2 days after, medevac botched as Digger lay dying. His family are in the UAE, and this is what we're dealing with. So it's difficult, it was impactful. It taught me to stick to the facts, try and manage myself through it, and even talk about it now can be a bit tricky. So it just, I learnt through seeing her, writing to the widows, writing to the family that night, writing that letter, which is you must do, part of your obligations. So, talking about command accountability, I think. Talking about what the difference between being a leader and being in command, and they're different, and you're never a finished product, and that solemn responsibility you have. So it can be quite conflicting, and I probably deal with it different to others.
And confronting too. Yeah,
really. Yeah, and seeing the body, you can't unsee that shit. You can't unsee what happens to someone with a blown up an ID, and there's no goodness there. But and I wasn't doing it for voyeurism. You sort of have to feel like you own it, and there's almost an obligation to, and I did it with the Terps who were badly mangled in a dismounted ID, and I was holding on tight. But what are you going to do? And seeing how Afghans grieve when they do it. So yeah, it's a place I don't like to go to, but you just have to deal with it as a martial commander. You just have to have some way of coping, because you don't get a mental health day the next day, right? Because Alpha's still outside the wire, and it's game on. So while you're there, you you file it away, and Dan Pronk talks a lot about this in some of the studies they're understanding now. Operator syndrome, and that comes at a cost that I'm discovering each day now, but then you're just hard-headed. Others tell me, I was just stuck on the resolve and let's honour their death and let's just get what's happening tomorrow. And that's a bit of a coping mechanism. I'd been exposed to death throughout my career in the regiment, so I was somewhat desensitised to it. That's probably a coping mechanism, but also a danger of not really understanding what I'm not dealing with myself. That makes sense?
Yeah, it does. And 2008 was a big year, especially for the regiment too, because Mark Donaldson was awarded the Victoria Cross.
Well, here's the other true story. When Legend 3 Squadron, I planned that mission had gone by the time they executed it. Topical now, because Troy Simmons, the patrol commander there's active on LinkedIn, discussing some of the findings around Brera, and we'll just come back to that in due course. Because Troy's on the ground, describing the heat of battle, and everyone's got a view on the heat of battle, except none of them could describe to me what it's like because I've never been there. But they refer to it like some sort of premise of fact. They have no idea. I digress. When I got there, we were naming operations after places, beaches. There was a loose convention. It was a CO's prerogative. I'm like, okay, being a Boy Scout and a junior woodchuck and, want to always be in the army, I went with the VCs. Why wouldn't I? Well, that was, what else am I going to do? It was sort of a bit jingoistic and a bit corny, but that's me. So we started with Jacka, but I said no posthumous names, right? No bad juju. So we started Jacka, Dunstan. I'll come back to Reginald Roy Ratty because that's my best war story. We'll finish with that. That's the largest, most successful tour. But so we were naming operations. Dono was a legend on his operation, but I wasn't there for it. But naming the operations to honour that legacy gifted to us, there was something in that. And it's curious that Dono then was awarded the VC. Not curious, but that's what happened. And I was so thrilled and honoured to see that. And I think he was on Operation Starcevich by the record in terms of SOTG reporting when he was awarded the VC.
Yeah, right.
And that changed then to Afghan names and framework CONOPS and everything changed. And Reginald Roy Ratty, R3, and there's a photo, that was the task force level raid that we featured in the book that others will write about. And that was a big deal and historic because it's only one off. And it was a set of circumstances I could share with you. Rick was my boss. Rick Burr was Commander ISAF SOF, a job I later did. He was the first in 08 and it was a theatre level 1 star with various task force operating under a NATO construct. Although the battle space owners were the US and in my space the Canadians. Of course, RC South at that stage was Canadian, 2-star. So we had proposed this raid into a very difficult to hit Taliban sanctuary. We knew it was a high risk area, a whole bunch of shadow governors, they were building bombs, lethal aid was coming directly out of it, ID factories. But we couldn't get the reach. Gizabs was up in the Daikundoi, it's up in the Kush, right up in the, it's like alien country. I think I said a combination of Land of Thrones and it's like, what's that dinosaur movie?
Jurassic Park?
Jurassic Park. The terrain up at night in a chopper above the Hindu Kush, when you're rattling around at night, it's like you're on an alien landscape, mate. Like the Chronicles of Riddick, and there's that. That's what it feels like for me, staring out of nods in the dicky seat of a CSC 47, rattling around, this little tiny little metal thing, and you're in this, oh my God, it's intimidating.
Yeah,
the terrain is particular. So that's where we had to go and try and get into. So I'll let the story come out, but we did it. We classic raid, somehow pulled it off. And I tend to understate it because at the time commanding it was a very stressful time in the lead up to it. And one of my most proudest war story achievements was I was able to somehow get that together and execute it and no one got killed. There's a photo of me at the end with Pronky and he's looking like this heroic Hector and he's got a Dragunov sniper rifle. So that's who we got a hold of. And Danny Hogan rugby tackled these guys physically because they got them so quick. I got out of the back of my chopper, I remember bang, that Alfred landed and they didn't have to kill the PSD because they were asleep. And they grabbed these guys and they rugby tackled them. So they should have shot them, because later, 6 months later, they were building bombs to kill Australians. But that's the catch and release. But that's what the Australian SAS were doing. They could have shot them, but they didn't. They rugby tackled them, and they knocked them over, and we got their trophy weapons, old Muj, Dragov sniper. So Prompi's got that. You know, it was a long walk off. It was about a 6K walk on nods. I'm stumbling around. I'd trained up for it, and I was lucky, and I made it to the extraction LZ just. I was happy to get there. Ask Nathan Junkowicz will tell you a story about that. So, you know, a lot going on in what I just said, but that's what happened. And looking back now, it's hard to believe it actually. I walked that ground, but there we were, because Rick said, well, you know that op that you planned and, you know, you need all those assets for? Guess what? Pull it off the shelf because you're going to do it. And I was like a dog who caught the car. It's like, because we talked about it, and Sean Parks, now a brigadier in Army, who was my planning officer, we're like, oh, we're going to do this, you know, but we never get the assets. So it's easy to talk about what we're going to do because we're never going to get, you know, we need like 6 47s and 4 Black Hawks. It was a 14 aircraft. It was a big deal, mate. We had lines of ISR, and we just come in out of the dark. It was a classic task force raid. No supporters, no engineers. We just went in all guns, every SAS, every commando, and a small SOC-C. I took in a Chook and the RSM.
Yeah,
and
right.
I set up my SOC-C in the madrasa, and we blew the shit out of this cache we found, and they'd set up a bomb factory components, and we just torched the shit out of it. That's what happened. It was like a classic. I walked off about 2 k's, there was this burning skyline of the Gizab, and it was like, wow, this is happening. And I was like, get the nods back and try and pick up the guy in front of me so I can make it to the, you know. So I'm back on martial competence, just dig a fortune, just cover your arcs, get to the, obviously a lot going on in my head, because you got C1, the joke. So that, right now, I don't hope anyone this is making sense, but that's my lived experience as a CO on the ground, leading a raid. It's a bit immersive. I get a bit deep into it, but coming back, it was very stressful. That photo, huge relief. Physical relief, I was busted, but honestly, the way to command is a thing. It's a thing. Well, it was for me. I felt it really. And I was not, check me out, see me, how good were we? I was like, oh, thank God no one died. And we didn't have a disaster. So that's how I felt.
So you come back from your 08 trip, highlight, massive, on a high. You've now done. You've pulled off missions that you could absolutely.
Right then, we were winning the war. It was all good, and the SAS were the heroes, and you know the people thought we were doing a great job. We were the Marvel superheroes, mate, and we weren't the war criminals by then. We were still the superheroes, and that's a hell of a ride to go on, I tell you.
Absolutely.
From superhero to war criminal.
And then you come, you come back. How are you mentally?
Look, it's hard to tell, honestly, because looking back, it gets jumbled up, and I think the first trip was the least impactful. Having said all of what I just said, the least impactful of my Afghanistan deployments.
Yeah, right.
Honestly, because it was largely a positive experience. And notwithstanding, even the losses, you felt validated. There was a sense of purpose. There was a sense of, you know, the team had your back, the chain of command were with you. You know, I was elevated and sort of, you know, there was lots of positive national sentiment. So I didn't feel the sense of betrayal or what the hell or this, the why, and I wasn't, and the cumulative effect it was not presenting. Now, having said that, you know, I came back, I had time off, I was very lucky. I was gifted that rest of that year off. I then went to a role at the Staff College as an instructor. I had a bit of a magic carpet ride career-wise, promoted early the following year.
Yeah, you were promoted to colonel.
Yeah, that was at Staff College. I competed strongly because the reporting of Duntroon and then my trip, and I'd picked up an award.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a minute.
Yeah. So I was on this magic carpet ride. You know, partly because of a bit of happenstance, but you do the jobs to get the opportunity to do the jobs, right?
Because
I was never going to Staff College, right?
What is the role of a full colonel?
Well, it varies on the job you were getting. You get your red tabs. It's a step into sort of staff rank, and you get out of regimental and unit embellishments, and you become a staff officer by definition. And So I was extremely lucky. It was at the end of mid 2009, Defence White Paper. They'd established linked to strategy capability. It was my window into bureaucracy. I moved into the strategic policy space in a direct around force structure, and it taught me how the force structure review informs what the government's going to let the Defence Force buy. But the reality was I was only marking time till I went back to SO Command. In 2010, by that stage the command had grown as a component and had been relocated out to JOC. So it was a big time, and career-wise it wasn't necessarily the job I thought you should do as a colonel, but hey, Tim McGowan was the boss, and I was just going there, and I was again very, very fortunate that that's what happened. But do you want to talk about that?
Let's talk about your Distinguished Service Cross and how that came about and what that meant to you to be awarded that.
Well, just thanks to the recognition is very, very important, but it can be very, very tricky and it's quite vexed. And for every recognition, that you get, you might feel that was one you might not have, but it is really because you start to covet awards, right? And that can be a crutch. And for a young digger, it's a really tricky space for me because you always wanted to be that guy who had that award, and then all of a sudden it can happen to you. It's quite tricky. I found it. But so I was, to some extent, the awards were you do the job, you do a decent job, you get the award, and that in itself is not where it should be. But I'm not naive enough to think that that's what happens, and the Australian award system's been vexed by that, and there's work to do. But personally, I was validated. I was puffed up, mate. It was a huge family event to the investors, which is wonderful. It was a huge thrill. But looking back now, I think it became a bit of a crutch, and it probably it made me skate over things that I wasn't really looking at, if I'm honest. Mm-hmm. But now I look back, well, was it legitimate? Or others can make their own judgments. But I don't feel that the citation says anything I didn't not. It says what I did, and I was on the ground. I didn't just not go on ratty. I went on the odd occasional trip, and my style, when I say trip, there was a couple of alpha mission profile night strikes. In, out, on target, out. Ben would be in command, 30-minute foot, we're going to hit a target. I would go. I did it twice. I wanted to get a feel for it. I chose to. I was a SEO. It was important for me. I did a lot of reconnaissance. I need to get a sense of the feel for it so I could visualise it. Now, that others might say, well, and I didn't do it all the time and often, but it was important for me. So that all that means, I guess, the words I felt that I was in command on the ground. Now, did that recognise, was I distinguished? I don't know. Others can make that judgment, mate. But someone said I was, and I look back now, and I'm very proud of the award. But I think there's work to do on the prestige of the recognition. When I joined the army, the Hans Fleers, the Bill Heinzens, that's what good looked like. That was the exemplar. They were the legend, humble, just immense respect. So that's what I hope it might mean to others. I could pretend I'm anywhere near, I'm not a patch on those guys, but that's what it looked like. So when you start to see yourself in that frame, it can be really weird, mate. Remember number 7 Rifleman at Singo? Same guy. With the DSC, it's like, no, this isn't right.
Yeah, hang on, something's going.
But then you go, well, hey, maybe I was that guy who did that too. So that's what it feels like. That first one, and then the second one, that's over the top.
Well, we're going to talk about that a little bit later on, but I want to talk about 2010. 2010-11, you deploy again. And this time for
12 months.
12 months. And is this the trip that you worked alongside Langertz, Ian Langford? Probably.
Langers and I worked in and out. Langers is a legend, and I know you got him on an earlier podcast, and he's the sort of guy, and promote him now, he's better than me, without question. Now, and I've got that validated because I've said this on LinkedIn. I was the J3 when Duncan Lewis, the most elegant, gifted senior official I've worked with, and wonderful gentleman and boss and superb leader. So he's SOCOS, and I'm the J3, and he comes, Dan, get in here and tell me why I should do this. And I'm like, it's totally inadequate, fumbling, I don't know. He's coming out with some really piss poor answer to the question he's asked me. It was about Black Hawks and justifying why we were back in the day. He said, get Langers in here. Because Langers is ADC captain. Langers comes in, he says, Langers, what should we do about X, Y, Z? Langers goes, well, sir, here's some broad options. Here's the context. I'd recommend this, but you might want to think about that. And if you want to do this, and I'm just, anything else, sir? And Duncan I just look at Duncan. Duncan says, no, thanks, mate. You can go. And he looks at me, I start laughing. Start writing that brief, you got that? And I said, yes, sir. True story.
That's Langers.
That's Langers, mate. So did I work with Langers? Probably. I had the COs I had then, the COs. The role was very important. It was a new role, Chief SOC CCAF. So he had operational authority to sign off on CONOPS up to night raids of level 1. And I had that for the Brits in the west, south, the south task forces, Lithuanians, the Australians obviously were the heavy lifters in Eriskin, and then to the west there was the Italians, and the southwest was the Brits, the Special Force. So it was a fascinating role under an ISAF soft construct operating under 10th Mountain Group, which was the battle space owner, General Jim Terry. They were 10th Mountain, really heavy-hitting warfighters. I'd been into the States at Fort Drum, had worked up through the team. So I'd come into that hot, having an ISAF soft context as a Brit. This stage was my boss, Lance Bands, who was the ISAF soft that rotated between Brits and Australians. So I was extremely lucky. I was revved in, probably as best prepared and as mentally prepared and as martially competent going into a job as I'd ever been. And I was so lucky to just land in that job. What was happening? We were in a surge, and it was full on, mate, and it was game on.
Because what was happening, so 2008 you were there, you come back in for a year in 2010, 2011.
Yeah.
What was happening? What was happening in and around that space of the war at that time?
It was post-surge. McChrystal had come in, people-centric. The task force, I mean, you understand there'd been a lot of fighting in Eriskin, back into TZAC, Battle of TZAC, RSSR, BC. Some significant further actions in Giza when the Burnsies tour, so Paul Burns. So it's hard to try and be accurate with this, but my memory, we had a US warfighting theatre. We had we were running under an IJC then. Yes, pretty sure we had a joint commander above the regional commanders at the 3-star level, coordinating the fight. So it was going into a big campaign of winning the fight and muscling up. That's sort of what it felt like. Aviation had been enabled at TK. The task forces were slick, and the tempo was up, and the targeting regime was much more mature, and fidelity was there. So it was a kinetic fight to defeat. Our job was to take the fight, to allow the other elements of the counterinsurgency campaign, to what extent that was effective or whole of government. Clearly that failed at every level. But that was the mantra, that was the narrative, and we were going hard to do our bit, and that's what SF do. Got a hammer, the whole starts looking like a nail, mate, and we had a big hammer.
Well, and as you know too, Dan, because you were there, we were just losing so many guys because of the fighting that we were doing.
Well, it was the casualty rate was increasing. I was consistently confronted and looking back, morally injured by the tempo of the Canadian losses in and around Kandahar. Not in any way understating the threat and the bravery and the heroism of the Australian battle force, the MTFs and the advisory task force. They were doing terrain-based stuff, tooling around with, there was a significant ID threat then, and the green on blue started.
Yep.
That's when it got nasty, and extremely difficult context and a whole bunch of. And this isn't the platform for me to be as belligerent as I might be, but that's what was happening. So it's really difficult, impactful operational space. The threat to force was emerging in different ways.
And because that was a big year for the coalition forces. With the Brits were getting smashed down in Helmand, the
Mate, the Brits were out hunting every night. Up north, up in north of Helmand, trying to think, there's a name that starts with an M. Really, really, really hard fighting. I'd often go in and out of Lashkar and out into the Leatherneck because I owned the operational authorities around Task Force 196, which was the British task force operating of Lash. They had their own organic national assets. They had the target engagement authorities under the British National Command, but they often used the ISAF soft authorities and frameworks for their level 1 operations for their Special Forces Task Force, which I was the approving authority. So every night I watched a lot of darts because on Sky TV my rhythm was long days, battle rhythm with the battle space owner in the morning, and then the ISAF soft hunting at night because the allume was less. The Brits had their own organic assets. The target deck was there, and I'd wait for the CONOP to land. I'd sign off on the CONOP and then make sure it was approved and met all the criterion, and they green lighted. Then they launched. That was my world in that year, and the Aussies, Grant Mason and then Jerry Burston, and they were doing some serious revs, and in many ways, looking back, what the hell was that all about? But there was some, and 66 was just cleaning up the north, and anything looked like looking sideways, they got whacked with no pejorative inference or any legal inference there. So that's my lived experience, mate. And there were significant nexus targeting operations into the contiguous zone around Uruzgan, sub-unit level terrain-based raids where we lost a succession of heroes: Brett Wood, Todd Langley, Ron Robinson. I answered to inquiry officers because I was the kind of approval authority for all of those operations. Sean Parks and his team, what we would, looking back, what the hell was that all about? But it was about lethal aid, hitting big heroin and drug factories where they were being processed. That was the transition point because that money would then fund the lethal aid. And the links back to it was a theatre fight then to some extent within the soft community, as well as direct linkages to the broader security of Uruzgan, but then it was getting loose because what the hell was that all about? So it was a real fight, mate.
So
and operationally, martial-wise, but it was full on.
For you, over on that, in that year, did you think yourself that this is it? I will, like, from stress-wise of being where you were, did you think, like, I know that in 2008 we had discussion off air. Every time you went back, you were starting to feel that I could be killed, and
the 14 trip where I really busted, and that stress of the vicarious cumulative trauma of dropping my fill and being really what I call the difference being all the tryhards out where you've been in contact or been in combat. So and maybe that's a good way to finish. But 2010 I came back. I don't remember. There was a lot of, again, it felt rewarding and uplifting. There was some cost, but it didn't present. The physical threat in my environment wasn't there. I was in secure Kandahar. While I was going in and out, and there were some moments, it wasn't the vicarious, overwhelming threat of fear. So I came out of 2010 thinking, no, good to go. And I guess the reality around this is, and I have to be put in context to remind myself. At the end of that year, towards the end of that year, Fortune gets told he's getting promoted to brigadier. Yeah. So, in that context, I was like, I was on a magic carpet ride, mate, and I was probably not looking hard at the things I need to look hard at in myself because I was on the roll. I was just drinking the Kool-Aid, and the jets were on, and the magic carpet ride just kept turning up. And, I was still promoted brigadier from lieutenant colonel in 3 years, mate. And I might be good in one space, but I was shit in many others, and I had no network. So, but right then, I'm like, hey, how hard is this, mate? How hard is it? If I'm being honest, thinking now what it felt like then.
Yep.
So I wasn't coming back totally busted, oh my God, out of body, like I was after 14. It was a positive experience. We just built a house. I was going into promotion back into SO Command. I was neck deep in it and totally blind to any of the realities that were happening because I was completely deep immersed in it. And if people have been like that, they know what I mean. You just don't see it.
Yeah.
It's totally not.
Well, you're just in the moment. You're
Totally.
just...
And that moment is just completely overwhelming because I've been in war in Afghanistan and I'm either there or I'm not, and it's about year 4 or year 5. And remember, I've been shooting terrorists in the killing house in SASR since I was 25 or 23. So I've been on a long ride in the killing house whacking those terrorists. And that's what our job was every day. So when you add it up, I'm completely OCD rusted on, mate.
Because how old were you? How old were you, Dan, when you got promoted to brigadier?
Well, too old. Well, I was older than average. I was at the top end of the physical bracket. If you, in the bell curve, I would have been at the back end of it. Mm-hmm. To answer your question, well, 2012, I turned 50 in 13. So I was 49.
Okay.
So, but that's relatively old, but not the model of miles, mate. Well, physically, I was about 150. But that's to answer your question. But in my career, I was relatively junior in my officer time frame.
Okay.
I'd only been, I'd been a lieutenant colonel from CO, promoted to lieutenant colonel, CO 08 to brigadier in 12. It was 12, yeah.
Yeah.
Not normal, but there's a question there because I wasn't that good, mate. It wasn't because of me. It was the organisation needed someone, and I was seen maybe as a safe pair of hands, and I was the punter who was around. I have no pretense it was otherwise, and more people came to my demotion when I was selected to go to CDSS than that were at my promotion. Yeah. So it's a long answer to the question. I was 49, but there's a whole bunch of context, and I came out of 2011 after a year, pumped. It had been tough, but it had been very rewarding. I was right in the niche, and as I said, going in, I was prepared.
So I want to talk about...
But the DSOC was the next 3 was when it tipped off into the darker space.
Well, we're going to talk about this now. We'll talk about, 2013, so you get promoted to brigadier, then 2013 to 2014, you go back into Afghanistan again.
Okay, so I get promoted, come back, and I'm the Deputy Special Ops Commander, acting brigadier in Australia in 2012.
Okay, let's talk about that.
This is the year.
Let's talk
Langer's
about this.
a CO. John Hawkins is CO. This is a difficult period of the war. Blaine Diddams is killed. Gus is my boss. We're at Jock. I'm at Bougainville. And this is the army in 2012 was in a different place than it is now. Beersheba was the thing. Chief Army was the former Australian of the Year. And so that's how I found myself, back in Canberra 2012. And the SOTG was just banging it out. And I look back now, and in the context of all, there's many things that the Burton report, which is many ways identifies things we need to look at hard. I'm not pretending there's not a lot of truth in there, but there's a lot of limited views of what that truth might be. There were some really failures of oversight and allegations of very, very serious misconduct and credible behaviour, of criminal behaviour. No, not that any of it's been ever proven anywhere. But 2012 was a bit, but I wasn't ringing John, and I was flat out managing the Force Gen RTS. All the impacts of our cumulative service was becoming obvious. We were flying loose as governance. We were not organisationally fit for purpose, and the impact of a battle group into the war in our battle group, it's about 350 rotation, every 6 months was about all we could manage, and we weren't doing that well. When I say organisation, we were busted, it was loose, and you were in crisis management. And I've had some senior management experience later, and that's what it was like. And we weren't helped by Army. And I wasn't prepared for it, mate. So it was a difficult year. But you're caught up in the hype of it, and I was sort of caught up in my own hype too. But, Blaine Diddams was killed. I was
And
acting
for that
SOC
action,
off.
he was awarded his MG.
Yeah, posthumously. And,
Posthumously, yeah.
We know the footage around that with Oliver Schultz, and it's going to come out in court if it ever goes to court. Yeah, the alleged unintelligible, should I drop this C? Blaine Diddams, they're going to judge a dead man. I bet they will. They'll throw him under the bus. They've thrown everyone else because they can, because they're gutless. But Blaine was that guy. So he was killed, and we were working out the notification, and I was acting SOCOS because boss was away. And I was playing grown-ups in the NFL, and I was running around, struggling, to be fair, and because I felt the network of my peers were just utterly uninterested in anything other than pointing their finger at us and saying, "Oh, we told you so," because there was this sneering contrition of, to some extent reinforced by the arrogance and the hubris that had come out of the command. But it wasn't me, and at the end of the day, we've just had a guy killed, and they're worried about the waiver, and we haven't even managed the notification of his bride. So that I struggle with that, and that's my lived experience. And in individuals that were there then know who they were, and they were sneering muppets, and they thought that their governance and the disappointing reporting of how shit we were at our stock taking, which is true. There was lots of signs there, but all the leadership there weren't picking up those signs and going, "Hey, you guys, we need to have a pause, we need to have a stop here." And no, it wasn't only that. They got smart about that about 3 years later, mate. When the wheels fell off, they got real smart 3 years later.
For you,
so I know I'm sort of sledging.
No.
It was a big year for me.
Yeah.
And then I went to CDSS. Then I went to I got the year, the high school year, and it seemed like a break, but it was a pretty busy year academically. Having said that, I guess through it I had my aspirations, and I was so much on the Kool-Aid. I had my aspirations to go back again as Commander ISAF SOF, and that's what happened. So I'm the guy who walked myself into where I was, and no one asked me to do it. And if I hadn't been given, I'd have been extremely disappointed, and I've been the first one screaming. So I'm owning it, right? That's looking back now, but right then that's where I was, mate.
So I
was on this magic carpet ride and it just kept speeding up.
And you were dealing with. You knew Blaine personally, and we both know Siani.
Yeah. Black Hawk anniversary coming up.
Yeah.
They're trying to honour it. It's a really tricky time. Blaine was a Rio 95. He was there through my early tours in the DST mission. Kandahar. As a CO, I'd get some space. I'd go to the guys next door at Russell, and Blaine and they'd come, just let me have a brew so I could get out. Because when you're the CO, there's nowhere to go, right? Where people aren't, what are you going to say? What are you going to do? I'd go there and just chill out. Blaine was great.
Yeah.
He's a wonderful, bloody scallywag. And that's his prerogative.
Yep.
He's a hero. And tragically, so it was impactful. It was a difficult time. And you don't realise it then because you're just doing it. That's how I look at it now.
Yep. You're in the moment.
Yeah, and very proud of the unit. And I look back at the blind spots. What didn't I do? What should I have done? Guys, Blaine said, John, buy and sell me 3 times over any day on a cold start as leaders and commanders, both of them. John was decorated 5 times before he went as CO. Langers, So I wasn't ringing them up, asking them how they were going and checking the church parade. If I spoke to them, I routinely, spoke to them once a week because I wasn't worried about the ops space. I had bigger fish to fry in the R2S. We had all sorts of debacles going on around our governance, which were valid, and we were flat out just trying to get ourselves organised as a component, being Army headquarters, functional headquarters, and that was a full-time job.
Yeah, right.
So I wasn't ringing the COs, and when I did speak to them, it was like, "How you going? What can we do to help? What do you need?" I was empathising in the operational space. I wasn't, I was blind to maybe some signs, but that's someone else's job, right? That's the general's job. So that's my lived experience looking back.
So then let's go forward to
SOF.
Let's go to that trip and talk about that.
Okay.
So you come back from your trip in 2011, 2012, and then you're advised that you're going to go back in 2013, 2014. Let's talk about that trip.
Yeah, okay. So I finished the DSOC role. Remember, I've been temporarily promoted. And the standing joke, there was more people came to my D promotion. So in 2013, I was given a wonderful opportunity to attend the Centre for Defence Strategic Studies, the Junior General School. And I was, during that year, I was formally packed or go to the board for promotion to 1-star, and I got a Guernsey, and the Guernsey was, I was lucky, probably wouldn't have made it on another day. The operational role suited my fit, and if I look back now, probably got an inside run because of my operational service to get promoted. Others have said, and I've said it before, I think I was over-promoted as a corporal. But I finally got promoted substantively at the end of that year with a view to go into Afghanistan as the commander ISAF SOF. And this is a big gig. This is the real deal in terms of the component commander, noting Rick Burr had set it up and we alternated the 1-star, we Australia, with the UK. And there'd been a succession of appointments. Australians, Gus Gilmore did it, and Mark Smithhurst had done the appointment. It had been somewhat shifted because when I went back in, so that was the gig, mate. So I get the Guernsey and I'm into Afghan, going in December, and I'm commanding 1800. It's a NATO appointment, so you're formally given a lot of CONOP authority and delegated target engagement authority. I'm working to a US 2-star under the new, by then it was called the NATO Special Operations Component Afghanistan, NSOC Alpha, sadly later known as CIVCAS Alpha. Much after, that was after the combat phase, but that's what it turned into. Scotty Miller, who was later the 4-star, hero of Black Hawk Down. He would have been an OC of Delta that I'd exchanged with. His squadron, he was the troop commander then. I had a personal relationship with Scotty, generally, he was my boss, but he was this legendary figure. So I was all of a sudden playing, and I was struggling. I want to reflect now. From the tempo, I thought I was good to go, but I really was the bridge too far. But at the end of the day, that's easy to say now. At the time, it was game on. And do you want me to just talk about the deployment?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So I finished CDSS, get deep, get re-promoted, go over there, arrive into Kabul. I go with a team, small Aussie staff. Shane Mackay, a major, quite famous in terms of Ben Quilty, did a portrait of Shane's the naked man, and he was a JTAC, a forward observer, and had done multiple rotations with the Special Operations Task Group with FE Bravo. So been in some serious stinks. He had then transitioned and became my MA, my staff officer. There was a small Aussie team of around a 1-star, you have your sort of executive staff. And there'd been a range of Aussie embeds in the headquarters. So NSOC Alpha, ISAF SOF was one of the 3 tribes. We had the NATO, effectively the NATO chunk of the Special Forces community. So 26 contributing nations, 14 national task forces, partnering with the Afghan Special Police primarily, and the regional forces. The Australians by then had gone home, but think of a US task, or what's a better example, the Germans in Murray Sharif partnering with some Afghan Special Police up there. That model was across the theatre. I spent a lot of my early and my operational focus was primarily in the east and on the retrograde of the contemporary general purpose forces, and we were fighting to provide white space. So it was the most kinetic, most operationally intensive sort of combat tour I've ever experienced, and I wasn't quite ready for it, and looking back, I got combat traumatised by it, to be honest, really. But the highlights are many and varied, and I'm jumping around a bit because I'm just trying to put it into context. I got in there in 14 in Afghanistan. The other 3 tribes, there was the US Special Forces Green Beret tribe that were partnering with the Afghan ANA Commandos, and that was the Siege of Soda line, and then there was the US Task Force National Mission doing a lot of strikes and the deliberate into Al-Qaeda or any of the high-profile targets. US National Mission Task Force. And we all answered to Scotty, who was a component under General Allen. So the theatre then was set that way. The focus was retrograded general purpose forces. The Obama timeline was set. The mission was determined to come off the combat phase and transition at the end of 14. So we were fighting, shooting our way out while the general purpose forces were retrograding significantly. And we were trying to keep the fight at length from them. That was the approach. And Scotty, and it was fighting for ISR and targeting, while there was a hyper-sensitised political environment around the elections. Because in the election year, of the 14 election, which at the time it gets jumbled up, but it was a big deal. First election, and Karzai was clearly there was all sorts of shenanigans going on, but the conduct of the election and security around it was massive, and we were intimately involved in it. So I went in the December. The first focus, and it was so different from my trip in Kandahar. I took over from Paul Kenny, and Paul had been in there in an 06 role, promoted in to the 07 role. So I had an Aussie to hand back to. They'd had a significant operational tempo, and he had great relationships with and the big difference was our relationship with the Afghan partner force. And I was intimately partnered with the senior police in the General Director of Special Purpose Police, GDPSU. So they were the Afghan Special Security Forces, and we were largely the elite of the police. And they were being UK trained, or that was the headquarters above. What the combat units were, what they called the triple digit 222, and they were the crisis response unit. Special police partnered over the years. The Kiwis partnered with them. You might remember the Intercontinental Hotel assault in 2010, and the famous photos of Kiwi SAS who'd partnered with the Afghan police to retake the hotel, 3-day gun battle, if you might remember the Intercon. Mm-hmm. Well, fast forward to 14, the Afghan special police are now partnered by Norwegians. Kiwis had come out, or in a different role, although early on, and I'll tell a good story about my first run as a dropping JDAMs on real targets as the target engagement authority. The Kiwis had a small strike team there. So our partnering was with the Afghans, which was totally different, and the police chief of Kabul. So senior, and a lot of time engaging with them in their ground, in their facilities, in a really high risk, super hyper-vigilant sort of threat environment now, vicariously all the time. I had my own protective security detail of commandos, and I was the one-star running headquarters of about 80, and those task forces around the nation. A lot of engagement at the senior level, and then obviously executing operations on a high tempo at night, and having target engagement authority for the kinetic strikes on the leadership. We had 3 lines of ISR, and they were loaded up, and we were hitting targets most nights. And I was the TA. I'd take the brief, thumbs up, thumbs down, and game on. So it was an extremely intense year in commanding. Significant challenge in the leadership space, but personally is probably where I reflect now as the one that was a bridge too far. But it's easy to say that now. At the time I thought I was doing okay, although I do reflect coming back from Rockall after a break, travelling with General Miller to a regional visit. I'd got hurt. I'd been training, I'd hurt my back, and I'd plateaued physically, and I realised I was struggling, and I had sort of 6-8 months to go. And what that role required, and where I found myself exposed to risks that I wasn't probably prepared for mentally, and I became increasingly hyper-vigilant because of the threat, the force of the perceived threat to my life, which can be quite confronting over time, especially every day you're going to live the next day, and that's what ended up being my reality. Because we're outside the war all the time engaging with the Afghans. And beyond that in itself was a threat, because at the time I'm driving around in 2 low signature, beat up, butt up armoured SUVs. I've got a commander, we're running low signature because the routes were too hot for high profile. I had certain delegations where they were black, we could travel anyway, and we just did. Because it was routine, you had to be engaging with the partners, and that was where the threats were. NDS, the Peacock of Kabul, and the GDPSU. So there was rarely a day I wasn't outside the wire, outside the gate, driving around Kabul, and they were just blowing the shit out of any target. Drive up with imagine a garbage truck full of AMFO. It doesn't matter what protected million, you're just gone. And that was vicariously scaring the shit out of me. I'll be honest, because I hadn't had to deal with that before. Yeah. But that was just what you had to deal with. So you compartmentalise it. And I realised it was becoming an issue for me because I was all over the PSD. I was telling you, if you're not on forward scout like in a sneaker lane at Kanungra, fucking you're gone. You're on the next plane home. I'll find someone who is. and I was revving them hard, and that was inappropriate probably, but that was where it was ventilating my stress. Instead of, and they want to play music in the car, turn a fucking music off, switch on. Yeah, that sort of shit from the back seat. They don't need that from the 1-star, but that's where I was somehow trying to deal with it. And that was early in my trip. Imagine what it was like at the end, mate. I was towing. But here's what happened is why it then became really real, and it's just not because I was fearful. The threat was there, but the role required. We had a CT response that had been matured over time, and there was a range of high-profile attacks in the lead up to the election. What they were characterised by was murderous attacks on a Western cafe. They'd go in and slaughter everyone inside, 20, 30, just shoot, murder them all, and then lock down and strong wall, and then it'd be come and get us. And it was a week. I think I went to 4 or 5, 6 over a sort of 6-week period. I can't remember. And the structure was, the rollout was of the Afghan-led, partnered by and enabled. We had bronze, silver, gold. Bronze was the tactical enabler at Norgies at the fight. Silver was the operational of Low 6, who had sort of their structure and building their operational incident management, if you like. And I partnered with the 1-star, 2-star, but the Afghans, it was pylon. So I then deployed in, found the senior Afghans and got with them, and I was then answering to IJC and General Allen. So I'm on the phone to them, and we'll talk about the lunch in a sec. But that was the rollout. But it was, so and it was quite, well, it was obviously real world. Where the risks were, apart from that kinetic risk, albeit I was, not at the fight, the way the Afghans responded, they had to go to the sound of the drum. And the Worcester and I don't know, the culture of their warrior culture, I'm not quite sure warrior is the right term, but you had to be there. So I had to be co-located, and that's the worst, most dangerous place. It's just to follow-on bombs, follow-on blows, and we're just tooling around, in the worst possible dangerous place, but that's where you had to be co-located. So, tactical responses, and that was over a series of incidents where I would be the tactical commander on the ground dealing with these very difficult incidents where you just strongwall, the boys would just have to strongwall in and reduce the stronghold and kill them, and it might take a day, typically 16, 12, 24 hours, rinse, repeat. And that's as well as the deliberate ops going on up the north to the east, BFCs, battlefield circulations to the east. I'd obviously get my own aircraft because I'd get allocated Black Hawk with the escorts, and going to places along the border that I wasn't really, it was like, get me in, get me out, BFC, to these outposts, Romanians and some of the Hungarian stuff. It was a fascinating insight into the culture of the new Euro. Gutsy as game as Ned Kelly, but I'm like, so stop, fellas, slow down. We just want to manage risk to force here. So there's a lot. It gets a bit jumbled up, as I said, but the memories are, career highlight. Working with such wonderful bosses, playing grown-ups in that space, that uniquely as a sort of martial experience. It was, I say, 30 years for 30 seconds. And sometimes I was making decisions that felt that I could mine that 30 years for that one call I had to make, whether it was an engagement authority or a no, I'm not going to, I want more info, or the aircraft we need to get that call sign moved or something. So that's where it felt. There were some really high points, but over the journey, I was really struggling to manage the vicarious and the cumulative stress, the allostolic load. Now I now realise what it was, and it was catching up with me big time. And there was one incident, we got caught in a convoy, it was around a protest, and I was literally dropping my fill. I was inside my head, shit scared. I was like, I wanted to drop I thought I was going to shit myself. There was protests going on. We'd been seen in this low signature rig. We'd been sort of ID'd. Remember that footage of the Brits signallers who got caught in a Northern Ireland funeral?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what it was like. It was this protest. It was really cooking off pre-election. It was an affiliate group of I think it was a Haqqani sort of affiliate. They were a really radical, quite making a point. They weren't aligned with Karzai, and they owned this suburb, and it was like we found ourselves there, transiting. There's a backstory to the way the PSD route selection got cocked up. Doesn't matter. There we were. And I was like dropping my fill, mate. And it was like you drive along, you bang on the doors and you see, like, look at us. And you couldn't go far forward. you know, in the lead vehicle, and we'd sprint forward like 30, 40 metres. It's like fully surrounded. You know, you can see me gesticulating, and they're looking, and you get forward, and then the word would catch up, and because they could see in, and they could see that we were white guys dressed with the low signature.
Yeah, right.
And then I'm getting my M16 out, or M4, because the idea would just strong-wall into a building and shoot it out. Obviously, call in the air, and it would be a fucking massive incident. General Fortune looking, you know, ambushed, and I'm like, what I take away was how scared I was, and I realised, oh my God, I'm not up for this. And it was early. It was about April. So, and I've had to work through that now with my psych, and it's been very helpful. But that was a defining moment looking back, and I can't remember in the sequence, but the lunch we'd called out to this particular high-profile incident. Do you want me to go to that now?
Yes, please.
Because I hope the listeners are keeping up, because I'm trying to keep up with myself. Go to a high-profile incident. I'm with Shane, the PSD. The key to this was to find the NDS and the police chief of Kabul, because he was the centre of gravity for decision making, and I could then advise my chain of command about ground truth. And for example, in this incident, there'd been a high-profile attack. The Afghans had done the right thing. They'd locked it down. We were on site. We had the tactical team slugging away. But they put a ROS, a restricted operating zone, above, and had shut down Kabul International because they were calling for air support through the international joint chain. The Afghans were calling for Apache gunships. So they put a ROS up, which shut down the airport. Not good for... So I found myself in the right place. I had comms with the IJC Commander, General Anderson. Laconic, wonderful general. I don't breed him like that in Australia, in my experience. And his boss is Alan. And the phone rings, and we're co-located with the Afghan chief and the boss of the Afghan army who owned the Kabul region. And we're on top of this building. We found ourselves up there. We're about 400 metres from the stronghold. And the general said, Dan, you know, they need Apaches. No, boss, they got this. Yeah, we don't need air support. They got it. So okay, good. Go to boy. And he shut the ROS down. And then I was there with the Afghans, and Shane tells it better than me. And we could hear, and we were getting a few overs as the shooting was going on, about 300 metres by the bird's eye. But you're sort of probably closer because that's where the Afghans want to be. You know, it was ridiculous. What the hell? You couldn't hear shit when they were putting in RPGs. And then the 12.7 from the Hummers were just reducing the stronghold. Support by fire.
Yeah, right.
And you could hear them change. What's the lull? They're bringing more ammo because they're just reducing the stronghold. You know, advance to contact, reduce it, because they'd gone inside, and we knew the drill by then. It would take about 12 hours. I'm telling Scotty, and well, we're just going to wait it out. Then comes the lunch, and without a lie, we're on the top of the building. My PSD are sort of watching and taking sight pictures. We're getting the odd definite thumps coming across, and the odd sort of bit of battlefield distractions, and this lunch appears in only Afghans can do. It's like a human chain up the building, and the carpet's laid, and away we go, mate. And all the generals had lunch, and it was a sort of out-of-body experience. And during the lunch, this belligerent old Afghan warlord, he's the Minister of Interior, I'll think of his name in a sec, dodgy as hell. So he's fire another RPG, and he'd literally look at Shane. We had comms with the attack guy, the bronze leader. Said Shane made the mistake of saying, well, I got on the comms. Hey, yeah. So vavumpa, and we heard that karump, and all the generals. You know, this is the way it's like with them. And I'm not about that. Well, I'm looking at Shane going, is this really happening? So then he says another one, and Shane's like, well, and he just like clacked it, you know. But that was, and then lunch continued, and in between RPGs and 12-7s, and you know, we went down. So it was that sort of, we're normalising weird shit. But the takeaway was, for me, during the election period and the drawdown, it was extremely intensive operational martial warfighting sort of command role, exposed to a lot of risk as a target engagement authority. The Kiwis early on, I took a shot I should not have. Did I explain the story with the IJC commander? We sort of got the 2-for-1, rang the NDS guy, and it was the wrong guy.
No.
Okay, so this is a lesson about the sensitivity of, what they call it, time-sensitive targeting. And it was hypersensitised for the right reasons, no collateral. And target engagement authority means at the 1-star and above level, you could launch an armed hellfire typically at a JPEL target if it met the pillars of the legal kill. And that was a practiced process. But instead of being at task force level, the operational level, I was the guy. And ultimately it was sucked even higher than me for all the right reasons. And I delegated it up because the technical and the number of lines of ISA you need to get a really appropriate collateral cover while you're lasing and targeting with at least 2 birds so you don't miss the shot. You need a lot of assets, and only that's muscled up at the theatre level by the grown-ups who do it for a living. And that was clearly the task force, and that was the right way to manage the risk, was to bring it up to the strategic. But there was still an echo of the operational component. You needed the flexibility and the delegations to be responsive to targets when they presented. So I, early in my tour, and had the Kiwis who had practiced and had the necessary elements, and we put a target pack together. There was a target I was briefed on. It got hot. It came to execution, and I authorised it. But what I learned, and it was a little bit sort of Gen 3 versus Gen 5, pixelated imagery, and we didn't have the third bird doing the ISR scan, which was not required but best practice. And it was, and just on the shot, literally as the second one rifled off, another body appeared into the kill zone. So we've got this person walking in. Oh my fucking! It was down south. So I'm now responsible for massive civcas, and I'm great. And I was like, welcome to the NFL. That was like, oh my God, I've just cocked this up. It wasn't the one I thought I was going to get sacked for, but I'm like, well, because I think I wanted to take the shot because I wanted to play grown-ups. Yeah, I reflect that sometimes. Yeah, maybe it wasn't, but it was legal and it was briefed, and I did so I could, which was the sort of gunslinger mindset maybe.
So,
but what happened was we found out was, luckily we through connections rang the NDS. The casualty was in the hospital. It was on the JPEL. The police were very happy. We got 2 for the price of 1. Pure arse. I found that out quickly. Got lucky. Lesson: don't play when you don't know what you're doing, Dan. You know, man, baby, shit. So even at that level, I was really calibrating my understanding of what risk looked like and what decision making was about. So the lunch story, the TA story, and towards the end, it was drawing down the force and managing the team out, because we withdrew and we end-missioned, and I got the opportunity to go to Mons. We had 80 names on the memorial. ISAF had 80 killed from 08 when Rick set it up. We had an end-mission 2014. So that's quite a significant achievement for NATO. And I was gifted the opportunity by NATO Soft Commander, and dedicated to the memorial board with all the names, 20 Aussies on that, stands on Mons. So it was end of mission. I had Australian staff who were superb through that embed role. We had no Australian task force though, but I had other task forces. I take away my US bosses, Scotty Miller, then he rotated to Ed Reader. Ed Reader was a US Siege Soda pedigree, and I called him the US gunslinger. Tempo down, I want tempo. Get those Eurosoft out there. We were really trying to partner. We were really trying to get the fight into the Afghans, but Ed wanted it done. And I love him like a brother, but he was very much, but get him out, get him active, and lead the fight.
So the tempo was still like it had sped up from 08 when you were there, and in the drawdown. Although you were drawing down, the tempo was still kinetic. And for you, at no other point in time that you'd been in Afghanistan, that was the most that you felt that you were going to die and come back.
Without question, without question, it was a personal risk. Cumulative effect of the tours. But personally, my lived experience was I was outside, partnering with the Afghans. Right? That was massive risk. Green on blues. I had a PST, have a plan to shoot everyone, and I was hypersensitised to it. And really contemplating every time I had to go outside and do a BFC or go with the Afghans, it wasn't a place I'd been before. And it was really hard to just muscle up and do it every day. I found that taxing. So that sort of, and over time that took a lot of effort.
Well, you're hyper-vigilant the whole time.
All of it wound up, and PSD, and then and they were killing senior officers, and the green on blues were real, and out in the road was real. And to make it worse, and this is a bit sensitive, I'll be careful. I had no risk by this stage. The mission was drifting, right? I looked around. What was this all about? I think I really realised the wheels were spinning. Although we had a timeline to transition, we were all just about getting out, not really winning. It wasn't like go in and make a difference. It was just spin the wheels and get out of here. It was a more professional job than a purpose. And at that point, I knew that wasn't working for me because I couldn't see it.
Well, you're not attracted.
Yeah, and I was drinking the Kool-Aid while I was there, but I think I knew towards the end I was definitely conflicted because of all of that. And for the soft community, this is and the DSC that was awarded is the citation speaks for that. It's always outside going to these high profile attacks, always at the fight. As a one star, I wasn't expecting that. And that was difficult. And our role was to be fighting the white space and take the fight so the general purpose forces could retrograde. So we ramped it up and we were drawing down, and risk to force was you had to partner ratios, or I was sending small teams out with a lot of Afghans. The Afghans were getting whacked. The Afghans were getting belted up big time. There was a lot of lethal aid coming from all over the country, west, north. Look what happened. So we were not winning. We were just trying to plug enough gaps so that we could get out in good order. The general purpose forces could transition, and we were all about the NATO. It was like that, mate. It was just get the hell out. It wasn't like let's make a difference and win. Sadly, I just turned and. Yeah, again, long answer to your question, but that was like, and the moral injury, working with the Afghans, I didn't believe in the mission, then the pedophilia and the culture was really injuring me. I'd learned enough about the way the Afghans operated, and this might be a generalisation, but man, boy love Thursday, and it was some of the elements are there that you had to square the circle on, I just wasn't prepared to anymore. I had to, but I couldn't avoid eye contact. Going to these meetings and being immersed in it, prayer sessions at the start, I was just rejecting what I was being asked to try and the value set I was being asked to try and partner with. I'm like, no, I'm not partner with this. This is not professionally. I was struggling to square train the force.
Yep.
For what purpose? Maybe that's just a Dan Fortune thing, but
no,
it was hard, mate. It was hard.
I understand.
At the end, I just didn't want to talk to the Afghans, and then I shut down. And I towards the last 3 months, I didn't want to go outside the wire.
You just wanted to get home.
I just wanted to get home, and I wrote limericks about it. And but I had to stay. And it was really, I think, where some of the more vicarious and impacts of the tours sort of got to the point where I was traumatised by it, and it impacted, and that's where maybe the damage occurred. You can get healed, you can heal out of it, but I was really shutting down and not being available, and that impacts on the way you engage with people later because it's a coping mechanism.
So for you, your most challenging deployment came right at the end.
Yeah.
You come back, and you knew at that point the wheels starting to fall off at that point.
Yeah, it was a bit out of body. I would come home from playing Afghanistan to playing Australia, and the Rockall's back and forth, and it was my second 1 year in 4. So the battle rhythm of Afghan was more familiar than the battle rhythm at home. It was just weird. It was out of body, and it's not easy to even make sense of the process. But I knew things that were not right, but I didn't really know why. And then trigger events occurred, and I came back to a role in MSC, the Military Strategic Commitments. I had a wonderful boss, John Fruin. I was back into this thrust of sort of strategic level, quite a high-profile gig. Working around, we had then, at that point, we pivoted into the ISIS and the OCRA, and there was a whole bunch of stuff going on in the strategic comms space. I was the Director General Stratcom/Strategic Effects, learning stuff about social media profiles. So I threw myself into work, but I knew the wheels were falling off. Then the declaration occurred, and that was a trigger for me to really feel conflicted about being awarded something I just wasn't feeling good about. And it was early, and I think then I can't remember exactly, but there was the context of Afghan and the Air Special Forces service. We pivoted from being the Marvel superheroes to the allegations were surfacing. I think it was early Konfovitz, and I was shut out. I felt, it was that relic from that war, and certainly I knew that I had some very much wake-up calls. I went to an Army senior recall session, and I looked around. I thought, I just don't belong here anymore. And the senior leadership were, focused on other things, and they had no sense of thought of what we'd just been in the war about, because they'd had an embed job for 6 months or something. I'm being a bit cynical, but that's what my view is now. Some of these senior officers thought their embed job was a sense of what it was like, and they're dialing out on their own conflated memories. And at the end of the day, I was not in the right place either, and I need to move on. So 18 months into it, I won a job in the public service, and I left.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the public service, what you did in that role.
Yeah, well, I was a transition, and I thought it was a good move. It was the dog who caught the car. It was a wonderful experience and a wonderful building of my leadership repertoire. And I don't want to deep dive into my ags for role, but I ended up getting a job as the Assistant Secretary Vetting. And I walked into this massive shit fight around positive vetting, backlogs. And I learned a lot about machinery of government and building a repertoire in grown-up sort of organisational design and building capacity to upscale. But I guess the real lesson was I had a female boss, real hard-charging first assistant secretary, and I was more intimidated briefing her on what I didn't know about my job, because I didn't know most of anything about my job, than I'd ever been going and briefing a four-star General Allen on a significant recovery operation that I'd probably wasn't sure it was going to go well. So it was a real transition challenge, and I was having out-of-body experiences. The best way, I was walking around a suit at Kemble Park, waking up going, what the hell? It was a bit like that, mate. And while I leapt into it and I had some successes and I learned a lot, it wasn't a good fit. I tried to hang on in the reserves. It was just in that weird transition space. And I was struggling with the impacts of my service in Afghanistan, but I didn't really understand what that looked like until, it started to coalesce and take a bit of shape over the journey.
So we talk now about your reserve time, and then when did you know, and we've got a little bit to go with the podcast, but there's some thoughts around, I want to ask you, how Afghanistan finished up and your opinion on that. But when did you know it was time to transition from the Army, and how hard was that transition?
In a professional sense, the clarity becomes brutally obvious when at some point, second year into my my job in Canberra, I had understood that my life was not going well and things were appearing in the family world, and I was struggling around the Australia Day Award.
Mm-hmm.
And that was probably a trigger on reflection, and because of the injury and getting decorated for it. And that weirdo, who's this guy? How the hell did that work out? So fast forward another few months, and I'm looking for my next job, and I realised then that I had an opportunity to speak with the Chief of Army, and I think the jobs that I was offered weren't clearly the ones that were going for the talent managed brigadiers. It was fair enough. I was over-promoted, clearly. And there was a conversation around, I think when I got the job, and I hadn't advised, I'd been told I'd been competitive and selected for the one band, one role. And I went back to Army and sort of explained to the chief in a career interview that I might have been offered this appointment. He said, and I was waiting for, no, please don't, Dan, because we need you to stay. And there was a pregnant pause. It was, well, congratulations. And at that point, it was like, yeah, go while you're on. Go while it's time to go. Mm. So I knew that I'd run out of gas professionally. I knew that the system had said, yeah, it's time to go. I didn't mire out or sitter or anything. I just left, which was good. Transition was very difficult. At the time, I thought I was doing okay, but I really wasn't. And I don't think you ever do. You just got to keep walking through it. I had a pretty soft landing in terms of employment. I went to a well-regarded role. I still had a solid network. I was getting some professional help, but I wasn't really picking up the decent rocks that I needed to in my mental wellness.
Mm.
And inside defence, it was quite conflicting. I learned how segmented and how packaged up the defence culture can be, because there was a significant transition. And within the SES culture of the public service is uniquely, it's a thing.
Mm.
I'm not going to give it any pejorative commentary because it's not fair. There's some really hard-working, extremely smart, dedicated people there. But it wasn't right for me. It wasn't a good fit. I learned that over the journey.
Mm.
I think I was reasonably competent. And it gave me a chance to look at the Army and the ADF, and they didn't look as good as I thought they would. And I realised that we were a bit puffed up and full of ourselves at times, which is okay, because that's fair enough. I was that guy. In some of the meetings and that. So it gave me a perspective to... Professionally, I think I built a repertoire. I learned some more aspects about my understanding of building teams, and I was very proud of things we did in AGSFA. But it wasn't my fit, mate. And I think I was just spinning my wheels. I remember going in there, I was just trying to get the hell out, find a pathway out. That's the reality.
Well, it's 42 plus years. That is a long time in the system. That is a long time, and you've from being a young kid to you're coming out in 42 plus years. That's a lot of years of service.
And the reserve service throughout that helped, and it was a good solid handrail. And I was very lucky to be offered some work. I had transitioned and done some work in the industry space, discourse, which was fascinating with the AGSFA connection. So working as a reservist supporting defence industry engagement. Then I worked back into SO Command as the leadership evolved. When General Kenny became SOCOST, there was a change in the culture, and I felt more welcomed. So going back in and working in that was very healthy towards the end. So the 42 years, that last bit, I was very privileged to be welcomed back into SO Command and given that opportunity to just bookend it that way. It was they were very generous to me. I was probably just some relic flapping around, but I think there was a protective nature of the reserve service, particularly post Brereton, when that came out, the ability to stay connected but somehow feel welcome, but it was just a safe space for a while, which sounds... So, that's how it ended for me, that last bit, just so that's on the record too.
So for you, in your opinion, how Afghanistan ended up and Australia's, what are your views on the way that it ended and how the Taliban came back into power? Was it worth it?
Mate, that's a really tricky question. Right now, no, it wasn't. It was a fucking total fiasco. An alliance management that was wrong-headed and mismanaged. But it's easy to throw stones at people now. So that would be my brutal judgment.
Mm.
And I said things on docos earlier, it's really conflicting for me. I think of the tragic loss and the impact, but some of the bravest, proudest, most, uniquely real memories that I'll ever have were in Afghanistan. So it's a really tricky question.
Mm.
It is what it is now for me, and I've just got to move forward from it and to understand what are the values that need to be protected and stand through and not allowed to be diminished because of Afghanistan. I think is more where I'm at now. The legacy gifted to us, the institutional path, there's a lot going on now. So it was what it was. The Army and the ADF need to be better than they are now and take the Afghanistan experience and make it something to be layered down like all the other experiences of the Army and the ADF, so that the future next fight we're better prepared. That's a cute little elegant answer, because otherwise I just get into my own... It's really fragmented to think whether it's worth it or not. But the brutal answer is no, and I look at the atrocities that are occurring, the misogynistic sexual predators and pedophiles that we were killing, and that's who they were. that we're apologising now to the government for are running the place. So that's why it's so tricky, mate. You know, how do you justify that when you've had men killed and the incalculable loss and sacrifice of their families? It's really hard to unpack it and make any sense out of it. That's why I want to try and do that in a more deliberate way, write some books and synthesise it into something that may be useful and make sense.
So, in your opinion, was the mission to fight the war on terror a success, or even partly a success from the way it ended?
No, it's hard to see any successes in it, frankly. If you were to put a KPI up against the war on terror, if you go back to the 9/11 days and what that looked like and what that stood for, no, we're in decline, and it's a race to the bottom. We're not there yet, and I can't find. Maybe this is where we get into the controversial aspects. I think the legacy of Afghanistan is yet to be completely reset so that there is something virtuous and honourable and to be commemorated and laid down. And I'm not talking about the individual sacrifice, and that's without question. It's the institutional. I utterly reject most of the reframed claptrap that's come out because it's self-serving, it's largely ignorant, and it's faddish. And the most recent report has rejected it as such. And there'll take some time for the contamination and the tectonic catastrophic mistakes, mate. And it's okay to make mistakes. It's not okay.
We learn from our mistakes.
Yeah, but when you don't own them and you continue to compound them by doubling down because you're too arrogant to admit, hey, we got it wrong. We'll just back up here and have another look at this. Double down through arrogance and hubris and this sneering sense that entitled with no lived experience to back it up, and because this isn't the way it has been done before. This is a complete departure, as if it's the right way. It's not, and history's now demonstrating it in damning style for the key players, and I feel very sad for their legacy but they hoisted themselves on their own petard. So again, long answer. It's not worth it yet, because we haven't got to the ground truth of what the institution, the army, needs to take forward. Things like recognition, accountability. We may never get there, but I have great confidence in the change of leadership to continue to celebrate the goodness, and that'll come through in the next. We see the goodness now in many ways. So I see the great young men and women of the ADF, and to some extent they're a reflection of all the service in Afghanistan, and they should be, and they demonstrate the best of that. But there's a lot of negative and utterly unacceptable legacy in some of our doctrine that's been confected that needs to be washed out, and some of the narrative and the truth need to be told around command accountability and the disgraceful portrayal of collective punishment. That is not worth it, and that's been stained and disgracefully, cowardly judged by others who weren't there, which is now in every way demonstrated as they haven't got the guts to go after the MUC, but they don't know what to do about it because they haven't got the balls to say we got it wrong. And how pathetic is that? And that's what so in that case, that's the fiasco of it. If you boil it down to what's happening right now in Australia, no, the Special Forces fought with great valour, and the sneering dickheads in Canberra talk about the sanctity of the Brereton Report, which includes a collective punishment to remove our meritorious unit citation. Bullshit. Come and get it, you cowards. They won't. But they won't walk away and say, you know what, that was wrong. Reynolds and Campbell really fucked it up. They didn't know their shit. Reynolds was completely compromised. She was a brigadier when Campbell was a 2-star. How did that work out, Linda?
So, for you, on reflection, the achievements...
Yeah, back to your story.
The setbacks and the 41 soldiers who were killed, how do you reflect on that now, and with the Taliban coming back into power?
Well, I think I've touched on it. It was a fiasco, mate. A long litany, and we're not the first. And smarter. And I don't know enough to make any judgments. And I was there, and don't suggest I would have done any better or made any better decisions, right? But, yeah, what was that all about? And right now here, but the reason that is such a negative, sort of resentful, loss, grief, because of it feels like that's the way we've been treated. And we didn't go there trying to do anything but our best.
You're trying to do a job.
Yeah, and the sneering, collective, disgraceful treatment really, really diminishes that, and that's not acceptable. And the Australian public don't believe that, but the organisational treatment of... So I'm not a useful person to ask and give you an informed, objective position on that, mate. But if you ask me, well, I just download all of my, some of my resentment, and that's okay, because it's valid. I'm allowed to get that out.
Absolutely.
I've got a good psych who helps me.
Well, for you, you've mentioned, and as I said at the start of the podcast, this is your story, this is your views, and it may be controversial to some people. Let's talk about the Chief of Defence and his leadership.
Well, I've made my views clear on other platforms. I think the questions need to be asked. And I offer just ask curious questions about the legitimacy of the preparation of the individual. It's important that in any other organisation, you prepare senior leaders with credible opportunities to demonstrate their competence. Well, there's massive gaps in that individual's preparation that just appear to be sort of hand-waved over. Accountability should be at the top. But others will make a more informed view, and it's not a personal. It's easy to make it personal. It's about the appointment, not about the individual. That's between. And I served in Afghanistan with the individual, up close and personal for a year. So I was in the room, mate. So I know what happened, and I was in the regiment. I was an operator in the regiment when he was running around eating a ration pack at Duntroon. Surrounded by sycophants, often the smartest man in the room, but not always. And history will judge that individual. But it's fair to say I'm looking forward to the change of command. Because the Army, the ADF needs a warfighter who can be trusted to lead people. You get that, you get trust, you get speed of decision, we'll win. Or we won't lose. You get a bureaucrat and a technocrat, you end up with a bureaucracy and a turgid, and look what's happened, mate. So, I'm talking about the new CDF will be brilliant.
Yes, yep.
Oh, look, many others, look, there's many other great officers who have been impacted negatively. Guys who'd buy and sell me 3 times over. That's why I get so rusted on about this. And maybe it might be a surprise to people because I didn't have any pejorative impact. But I was never asked to any ideas about, never ever offered a view about culture, accountability, leadership, despite my somewhat unique service. Not a cracker. So that just shows, mate. So people who missed out, I feel, buying somewhere 3 times over, 5 times decorated. That doesn't work, mate. That's bullshit. Now, we just might have to name out. So there's an officer there that I have massive respect for, who's being asked to explain why his DSC should be not returned. And it's a hypocrisy of vomit-inducing. And it's not acceptable. And I'm rusted on with this because it's just, that's not, when I joined the Army, tell me if I've told this story before, but what did battlefield leadership look like and what did you want to emulate? And now we're suggesting that what were you thinking? No, it doesn't work that way. If you're going to do that, then you start at the top and we all go down, no problem. But you don't segment it. It's just utterly unacceptable and it will not stand. So that's what I think.
It's great to hear those views. It really is. And
I think I'm saying things out loud on public platforms that other people are saying anyway.
Exactly.
And it does. But I know I bring a brand, and if I'm Dan Fortune, DSC and Bar saying it, well, with my backstory, maybe, just maybe, I might not be right, and my truth might not be the truth, but it's an alternate counterfactual to the claptrap that's coming out.
Absolutely. And, well, mate, I want to talk about your opinion of the new joint selection of the 2nd Commando, and you can get your thoughts around the SASR and 2 Commando joint selection.
Yeah, look, best way for me to say, so I'm really thrilled with the new SOCOS appointment. I've got immense respect for and the leadership within Inside Command. I don't know enough about the detail, and I know that they'll get to where they need to be. And is the joints? I've heard some anecdotal stuff about the joint model, and I think they've got some work to do on the enabler model. I think I don't know enough. Yeah, but if you ask sort of intuitively, my gut call is, and I think the Special Forces units need to be able to segment and be what they need to be to win in their domain, and they've got specific warfighting specialised as you'd expect. It's a complementary. And I'm not across the brief detail. My last classified brief was some time ago, right? But I think it won't always be the most efficient model when you build a Special Forces workforce, and some of the things will be counterintuitive and based on judgments that won't necessarily be backed up by data or best practice if you look at it from a different lens. So I think what I'm hedging is you've got to have the capacity to have unique selection models if you want unique units. And you've got to balance that against the culture. The idea of this, I think, there's an element of it that's confected to the Breton cultural stuff, right? That's bullshit. You get that through leadership. Now, there are other ways of bringing in, building workforce, modern workforce fit, got all that. If that's why they're doing it, fine. But if they're trying to, unpick the beret wars because some, cultural workforce with some human, competence, cheerleaders going, oh, no, we need to do it this way because we're coming together. Yeah, bullshit. You get good command team and you do bonding activities and you direct and you hold people accountable. That's how you build teams. And you build vision, you build purpose, and you work together and you get in the trenches. This join together is selection. I mean, that's the sort of nonsensical response we'll get from a bureaucrat and a technician who thinks they know better. The benevolent expert, mate. They're not benevolent and they're not experts. They're nefarious, self-absorbed narcissists who think they know better, and they don't. Because no one ever says bullshit, that's a really dumb idea. I guarantee that senior leadership hadn't heard that since he was like an OC when he was in the regiment and there was a mutiny. Because that's a dumb idea. And since he's been surrounded by sycophants. Oh, yeah. Great idea. And most of the time, he's pretty smart. But except when you have to go and do shit.
So, well, there you go.
So slip in that. So
that's Dan's thoughts.
That's okay. I hope that answers the question.
It does. And well, for you, what advice can you give to anyone who's
Special Forces? Yeah,
thinking of
I
joining
love
Special Forces, and you, because you come from a unique experience of doing 3 lucky dips. What advice can you give to someone who is thinking about joining and mentally, physically? What advice can you give to them?
Well, thanks, mate. And I'm going to write books about this. So
we're going to talk about your books in a minute.
So I should have something useful to say, you would think, but I don't think as much that I could offer that hasn't already been said, So it's a bit of a statement in the obvious, but you got to decide the why, and it's got to be authentic because you'll have your epiphany. And, people who withdraw at own request, I've got no issue with it. No, because that's the epiphany they had to have. I just would suggest you find that before you turn up. Because, and that means the preparation needs to be no shit. You need to have those conversations and get that why understood. Because the lived experience is that you'll go to that why anyway. At some point, no matter how well prepared you are physically or how robust your mental models are, the course is designed to rupture those and find that space where you didn't have a solution in the toolkit, right? And they're very good at it. Well. So therefore, the only way you respond to that, and it's a bit of the Jordan Peterson, is you practice your weaknesses and understand and be able to be comfortable in the VUCA, the volatile, uncertain, complex and adaptive, and there's high performance models. Know yourself, measure yourself, think beyond yourself, worship, basically shit like that. Hey, what's your citadel? Where do you go when you're under the pump? Have something beyond your own iPhone to work out how you're feeling in the day. Don't have a meditation app because you won't. What's your meditation go to when you're under the pump and someone's shouting at you and you're shit scared and you're freezing? what now, platoon commander? Now, you don't develop that on the selection course. You know, or Trooper Fortune, number 7 rifleman will have those moments. You know, number 7 rifleman had to find out what the fuck. So that's where I built my competence to get through the officer selection at the end, without question, direct linkage. So get in the arena and find out what it's like. Try it on for size. And if you're not, then don't turn up because you're just going to waste your time. So prepare, but get on the edge and get comfortable out there. Otherwise, you're not going to make it. And even you might not make it anyway, right? But at least you've had a decent go at it.
Well, I don't ever begrudge anyone, mate, who has a go.
No, and you know, and it's an imperfect solution. And I had, you know, I had a wonderful conversation with Graham Bremer, who was the Wing SM Prairie Dog legend. I think I talked about him.
You did, yeah.
Yeah. So I spoke to him about a week ago. Because I'm going to go and interview him for the DVD, for the video.
Yes.
And he was superb. You know, he said, I would have selected you in 82. And I was like a complete muppet. He said, but, you know, I saw something. You know, but he was frustrated with the DS and the belligerence of the DS that were shit canning, you know, not me. And I said, oh, mate, I wasn't ready. He said, well, you know, I wasn't. But,
you were in 84.
But it just shows, and he was, so it just goes to show that I guess, I can't remember what my thread of thought was, that he was talking about me being ready in 82. So you get to the end, mate, it's a journey of your own. Let them decide and don't overcook the optics of it because you're going to have to find yourself in that process.
Well, as you say too, I think, Dan, what you said, and as you said, in 82, you come back in 84, then you come back in 92. As you say, and most Special Force operators I've spoken to just said you take it minute by minute, hour by hour,
totally,
day by day. And that's the only way to get through it.
Totally. Yep, that's great advice. So be in the moment. So that would, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a given, but you actually have to keep hearing it. And that is a very effective coping mechanism and a very legitimate approach. You have to be able to then calibrate that with how you're building the capacity to be there at the end.
Yep.
But yeah, that's good advice, mate.
Absolutely. And for you, mate, what are your plans going forward with your family and for you?
Well, family, a bit tricky. I'm not going to get into the detail, but we're in a great place there, and I'm looking forward to continue to build and grow. And I've got grandchildren, so it's a joyful time. My daughters are beautiful, and I'm very blessed with a lovely wife. So. Yeah, we're working out to be our best selves and go forward. So family unit. So that's big rock, mate. And it's taken me a while to sort of keep saying that out loud instead of that was secondary effort. And I look back and that wasn't where I was, and it comes at a cost to my family. And partly that's okay because you don't get to be in the SAS and do that shit without. But it's very selfish, and I recognise now I don't have to be that guy anymore. So I'm trying to be, evolve and grow into that next best me, and family's at the middle of that, the centre pillar of that.
Absolutely, and I've spoken to a few operators, and I've spoken to as recently Langers, and as you know yourself, being that you were in the military for 42 plus years, and the majority of your career in the SF world, and it was something that Langers said that. If you go SF, be prepared that it's going to bite, and it's going to bite hard. And your family, as you said, there's been a lot of sacrifice, and there was a lot of, Dan Fortune, this is my career, this is me. Now you've come full circle, and your family is the main priority, which is fantastic. And for you, Dan, how important has faith been for you?
Well, there's a bit in that. So I acknowledge absolutely the cost to my family, and it's not unique to other families, but my family's had their journey, and I'm blessed that they're at the other end of it. But you're right, faith. I'm a man of faith. I'm a Christian, and I know my truth, and it's increasingly more important to me now. I'm not going to get on and start talking in tongues and prolethesize, but I'll give you a couple of stories. And everyone will work it themselves out, and I tell you, when you ponder your own mortality on a regular basis, I would offer you go to the sacred. that's a legitimate and very proven model to cope with the trauma and horror and the utter fear and revulsion that is trying to kill someone and they're trying to kill you. It's not a good place to be on a good day, no matter what badges you put on. When you think about it, it's purgatory. So that sort of wisdom, lived experience perspective, I saw the impact of a padre in the physical presence. I had a wonderful padre, Mano Mamau, who was COSOTG. The boys wanted him present when they went out. The vehicles, commander, this is, think of a company of SRVs or a patrol or a trip in LRPVs. The padre would be there and he would bless the vehicles, walk around and make signs. You would not believe who would be there taking the knee and, padre, come over and, just be there and give us the fist bump. So it's funny how it presents in combat and on men about to go into that very weird and sort of quite sacred place. It's a way, and you need to be somehow. What's the word when you come out and you're washed out? You're refined. You're cleansed.
You're cleansed
because you go in, and that's a deep. It's a deep. That's how they've integrated warriors back. And it's been a spiritual aspect of that and an atonement of what sins. So it's a very tricky space, mate. You're not put on earth to kill people. So when you do it for a living, I think if you don't go to the sacred space and understand what that's going to mean to you, well, I don't have any other way of understanding it and trying to reconcile and then try and be my best self tomorrow, not be captured by, that dark abyss of death and horror that you have to go to. And that's your workplace and you have to get good at it and be the warrior and conquer it. So, and my faith allowed me to do that. Psalm 23, on a good day, mate, I'd never felt fear. My early trips, I was pumped. I got scared when I lost my bottle, and my faith wasn't enough. It just wasn't enough. I was praying hard, it wasn't enough. It helped me. I got to the end. God, without that, mate, I reckon I'd just throw my hand there and said, "Fucking take me home," which would have been okay. But I was hanging on that tight. That I was hanging on. I had all sorts of rituals before I went outside the wire, mate, and they were all very, very old-fashioned and religious.
And your faith has helped you in your recovery?
Been central, transformative, and I've been wonderful. Been very lucky, and it's a good news blessing. And I'm, I know who my superhero, my cosmic superhero is, mate. And at that point, I have a formal relationship with my faith through the Military Christian Fellowship. I was a patron. When I was deployed, David Hurley, the now Governor-General, I had a wonderful opportunity to speak with about some of the issues that I've unpacked. Had an opportunity to speak with him, and he was very generous. I saw him at an event, and he invited me to talk with him. He was my CO when I was a Subaltern 1RA, and he was CJOPS when I was the CO. He briefed me in, you look after the bloody the RTF, Fortune, it's your job. Angus told me the same thing. So I was in no doubt what I was doing when I was a CO, and David Hurley was part of that.
Yeah, right.
So, but he was the patron of the MCF. So, we get a bit self-conscious about faith, and one of the issues I'll just leave for the intellectual discussion, but I look at some of the doctrine and some of the claptrap in the profession of arms, culture in the profession of arms. I invite all of your readers to have a look at the most recent version. Oh my goodness. You know what's not in there? Heat of battle. Not the word in there is there's no faith. You can believe but not faith. It's absolutely, in my humble opinion, I'm not an academic, but I'm a practitioner. I look at that it's got nothing in there useful. It's written by, and on the additional reading, there's a particular psychologist in there of a female type, Kompovitz, who others have said what they've said about her performance as a psychologist in interviewing SAS traumatised veterans. She's in there as additional reading. So, get back to what we got some serious decontamination, decontaminate, and to pull out some of the postmodern claptrap. But it's a contested space and it should be contested. But right now, it's woke ideology. You have a human performance professional in the Navy, not padres. There's a whole bunch of, hostile to traditional faith, but only Christian traditional faith. And we'll see where that goes, because the lived experience of the warfighting experience of the Australian Defence Force and the Army, despite they don't like to look at lived reality, they like to look at models and very fascinating academic debates, but there's no practitioners in the middle of them. And that's clear in this doctrine. Yeah, and the people who write them are staff wonks, generally reservists, good people, but have no lived experience and have no reality of fear of combat. They've never shit themselves and had to shoot someone and kill them and shoot them in the face, or seen someone torn up in a... So how the hell... it's not their fault, but why is that being allowed to occur? Because it's a convenient solution to, I'll get back to the leadership lens. So my faith's been very important, but I'm not the right guy to... I'm not a padre and I'm not proselytising, but if you're a martial warfighter and you're a senior operator and a combat commander and you haven't thought about the sacred and where you go to in your overall competence to deal with the pressures and the solemn responsibility and obligations you have, and you don't go to the wisdom of what lived experience tells you, then you're a muppet and you're not a professional warfighter, and stay in academia and write something very important that no one will read, and you can have a very fascinating conversation with another academic. And as soon as the warfighter look at it, like me, I go, that's bullshit. And you go, oh, well, what would they know? Then I'd be the limited muppet who's just, the SF white privileged, idiot. And that's probably a legitimate view. But I'm also... that guy's calling out you academics who wouldn't know your ass from your elbow. and I'm saying that publicly. And there's a research centre full of doctrine writers in the ADF that are generating this claptrap. And example 101 is culture in the profession of arms. You know what's not in it? It quotes Burton, doesn't quote cultural responses to the heat of battle. What an opportunity. Not in there. It's absent. Why is that? I find that curious. I'd ask your listeners to inquire as to why. We just updated our doctrine, but we didn't address the central foundational issue of the war crimes allegation. It's elegant. Go back to sophistry. It's an elegant bureaucratic response, mate. But it's no good to warfighters. It's not a warrior's document. It's a bunch of talking points and academic claptrap that you could have a very good working group and seminar and discussion around. And that's okay. But it's not military doctrine to inform commanders. And that's me saying it. So, long answer, but back to the why, mate. My views on faith are only relevant in this forum about why that makes you a better combat leader. Yes, it does. Beyond that, what the fuck do I know about faith? Beyond what you know, mate. But if you want to be a fighter, you want to go down range and put Australians in harm's way and order them to their death, you better fucking work that out. And if you just throw the faith story out, well, you're an idiot. Try it on for size, otherwise piss off.
So for you, and I like that. That was really good.
So because it's not convenient and everyone's self-conscious about it, and all the academics in our war college not allowed to talk about it because all the psychs, you're not allowed to say faith and, God and Jesus, mate. You're some sort of weirdo, white, relic, fascist, but you can say anything else and get away with it. And all this bullshit clap. You can lie, you can use fear and deception, and you can get away with that if you just cancel people.
So knowing what you know now and all that you've been through, what advice would you give your 18-year-old self, and would he listen?
Probably not. No, dive in, don't let fear hold you back. And he would say, what the fuck would you know? Oh, thanks for that, mate. Just get out of my way. So I honestly would not, an 18-year-old, I was pretty belligerent, and I wouldn't propose to give advice to myself. But what I might offer to other young 18-year-olds, I've said about the preparation for the military, and I'm flat out trying to make sure I'm the best I can be tomorrow, mate. So I give myself advice on as you know, hourly basis. And I've developed a sense of confidence that I know that when I get to ground truth, what that true honest self might look like. I'm getting better at understanding that. So at 18, I wouldn't have been interested.
So Dan, looking back now, with 42 plus years of serving your country, was joining the army still the best decision you made?
Oh, yeah. it wasn't really a decision. I listened to Langer's intro podcast on the drive up here. No, the decision, yes, but it was a cascading series of decisions, and I've been very blessed and lucky, but also surrounded by such great people. So there's no question it's been my central, the platform of which I've been able to go on my adventure, mate. And absolutely, it's allowed me maybe to be who I was meant to be, and that's the child of God, shine the light. So very much, I've been extremely blessed, but it was never really a decision beyond each step. Was that path I had to walk.
No,
and that's not trying to be corny. It's just it didn't feel like I'm going to join the army. It's just I better join the army because that's who I've got to be that guy.
So for you mentioned throughout the podcast that you're writing a book. And how has that come about? And when can we see it, mate?
Yeah, well, thanks. Finished up, retro medical discharge, hell of a journey, retired, transition. So it's been the last couple of years has been a really important reset. And I think the reserve transition, I've had a wonderful opportunity to coach with Cubic, and that's been another little chapter and opportunity to see the army up close in the black shirt Cubic space. But really, what I think my next, I'm committed to is a series of books. I'm arrogant enough to think I can write. I want to write the trilogy, and I've been refining it around issues of, the three themes will be leadership, accountability, and recognition. I'd like to write the first book. I call it the Trinity, and my formative experiences in my selection courses, and use those selection courses as a backdrop for exploring what leadership, accountability and recognition meant and what they meant to me, and to put it in the context of SAS service and getting through selection. And the sequence, I think I might have mentioned, 82, then 92, and then pivot back to 84, because this year, the first book and the Trinity coincides with the reunion of the 40th Rio cycle. Mm-hmm. My current thinking, and I've got some professional, I've bought into a platform to really get supercharged on the book writing. So I'm confident I can generate the content. The second one, I was thinking more about a pilgrim's journey and take those three themes and lay them out over what that's meant in the career in Special Forces versus just the selection, the actual episodic service and what that meant. And you can see where I'm going around the themes. Well, maybe I'm hoping there'll be a theme, there'll be some unity around thematic approaches about leadership, accountability and recognition. Because then I want to write the third book, or the bookend to conclude that series would be about all of that means so what in Afghanistan, and therefore what did we take out, and what would I slap the table and say, well, here's Dan Fortune's view of what you should take away, and I'd be offering, this is what I reckon. But I want to build the sort of shared experience, and I guess as I write it, refine my thinking. But that's the approach, mate. Yeah, it sounds a bit ambitious. I've got 6 months per book. Well, I'm not talking about writing significant, they're not going to be academic cross-references, and I'll be they'll be sort of once over lightly on the adventure around those questions, and that's as best I got at the moment.
No, that's good. And, well, mate, I look forward to reading the trilogy when it comes out.
Soldier Fortune, the Trinity of Selection. And I get that far, and who knows. Now, the good news is I've got some exciting other things that are in parallel that I didn't have last time. Mm-hmm. So there's a doco coming out. I won't, no spoiler alert, but some of the real heavy hitters in the regiment operate. It's called Bravery and Betrayal. And I'm particularly excited about this project, and I've been invited, I feel somewhat humbled to be invited to offer a senior officer perspective. So in due course, that'll be coming up out of the ground, and watch this space and more. And I'll obviously ask you to promote it when it's a thing before it...
Yeah.
I don't want to talk about a unicorn until it's not a unicorn. Yep. But we're talking about serious hitters in this, and big names from the credibility within the regiment, and not a rant, because I'm a ranter, and I need to be calibrated and dialed into some useful. So I'm going to try and be grown up and put my manners on for this one. And then secondly, another great saluting their service grant initiative, and I've got some Jeff Hughes, CEO of Their Story, to do a bit of a proper, a more professional look at the 40th. He's seen the DVD, very excited about the Golden Road, the reboot, with some stories. So I'm preparing that grant. So they're sort of short-term, immediate initiatives that are all celebrate the Beret Parade, December this year, the 60th, the 40th, the book. Probably got too much going on, mate. But that's a good place to be. You know, too many balls in the air. The crystal ones, the family, the wellness. Don't drop those. You know, stay. There's a few things moving around in terms of all of that, which is all positive, and particularly after a bit of a really difficult 2-3 years, you know, where we're growing back out of some fracturing, and but too much going on. But yeah, at the end of the day, it doesn't come off. That's fine.
The future's looking good for you, mate. That's
one day at a time, buddy. And being part of this podcast and building a friendship, and as we're probably getting to the end now, I listen. I go, would anyone listen to this stuff? And that's your problem, not mine. I know. But I just want to reinforce how thankful I am and grateful, because being in the podcast and the journey of this, and I'll do others, and hopefully I'll get better at it, because there's probably a story people are interested in hearing, is how helpful that's been and how important it's been to my wellness. So thank you for that.
No, you're welcome.
In the journey, you know, you can edit this down and probably get... Langer's got 900, I'll be happy with 9.
I'm sure you'll get more
a double figures, mate, it'll be good to go.
So, mate... How do people? We're getting very close to this, this is part 3. So we're
well, they won't listen. Yeah, part 1. They go, is that it?
We've been on a journey, and how do people get in contact with you, Dan?
Great question. Website, SAS Association website, ACT branch, and when we put the podcast out, maybe we can be a link or something, because I'm building literacy. I'm a bit of a Luddite, but you know, we did the Black Hawk. We did a wonderful memorial. So the website's coming up out of the ground. In some competence through that link, mate, and that's the best way. People want to contact me. Hey, that's a very generous offer, but yeah, I got small bandwidth. Why would you want to contact me? Wait till I got a book to tell you, and then you can, then you can turn up at the book launch. But that's the website and/or through you emails, you know.
Yep.
But I'm not really a public figure, and I don't choose to be too much, you know. Yep. So I'm not sort of seeking everyone to reach out and go, hey, thanks very much. I just want to be part of your story, mate.
No, thank you.
Your platform.
It's been an absolute honour and a privilege to have you on. And Dan, I want to finish with a quote. And you've served your country with honour and brought pride to your family. Your story is one of true grit, determination, being seventh rifleman and going.
That was my gig, mate. Number 7 rifleman.
Number 7 rifleman, and then doing three lucky dips. Oh my God, I take my hat off to you, mate. Like, one's enough.
What was I thinking? What the?
And as you say, it's shaped and made who you are. And there's a quote, mate, that I want to finish that I really believe sums up your story. And for those who dare to dream, really do win. Who dares wins. I think it's a very fitting way to sum up your story, and I believe this sums you up. And I want to thank you for your service to our country, and I want to thank you for the work that you do for veterans. And I appreciate you coming on True Blue Conversations and sharing your story. It's been an absolute honour and privilege. Dan Fortune, DSC and Bar, thank you so much.
My pleasure, mate.
Welcome, loyal listeners of True Blue Conversations. Today's episode is proudly sponsored by Australian Warfighter Coffee. Veteran owned and run, driven by a simple yet powerful motto: people over profit. Every dollar goes towards supporting veterans and first responder charity groups. Head on over to AustralianWarfighters.com and use the code TrueBlue for your exclusive discount. Because let's face it, any other coffee is just brown sadness water. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of True Blue Conversations with your host, Adam Bloom. See you on the front line.